Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Thank you for being here, and welcome to this meeting of the Nevada Youth Legislature. Before we get started, I'd like to ask the Secretary to please call the roll.
Youth Legislator Allen.
Present.
Youth Legislator Alvarez Flores. Youth Legislator Breeden. Youth Legislator Kane.
Present.
Youth Legislator Chang.
Present.
Youth Legislator Chen.
Present.
Youth Legislator Chong.
Present.
Vice Chair Cohen.
Present.
Youth Legislator Conyers.
Present.
Youth Legislator Coughlin.
Present.
Youth Legislator McCarthy.
Present.
Youth Legislator Wen.
Present.
Youth Legislator Obstgarden.
Present.
Youth Legislator Park.
Present.
Youth Legislator Perry. Youth Legislator Rigonti. Youth Legislator Rosas.
Present.
Youth Legislator Villatoro. Youth Legislator Walsh.
Present. Present.
Youth Legislator Wolf.
Present.
Chair Rios.
Present. Thank you. Now I'd like to cover some housekeeping reminders for the youth legislators and anyone providing testimony today. Please remember to turn the microphone on, identify yourself for the record each time you speak, and turn the microphone off when you're done speaking. I would also like to ask everyone to please turn off your cell phones or other electronic devices at this time. Please note this meeting is being recorded and uploaded to the legislative website. Keep that in mind as you deliver your testimony and ask questions of the presenters today. For members of the public attending in person, please sign in at the table near the entrance at each location. Please sign in even if you do not plan to provide public comment. Finally, all materials received prior to the meeting have been uploaded to the NYL's meeting page. Our next agenda item is public comment. Public comment may be provided in several different ways, all of which are listed on the agenda. At this time, if anyone would like to provide public comment, please remember to identify yourself for the record. To ensure that everyone has an opportunity to speak, I would like to ask anyone speaking during public comment to keep their comments no more than 2 minutes and to try to avoid repeating comments that have been made by a previous speaker. Remember, there will be another period for public comment at the end of this meeting. Is there anyone wishing to testify at this time for public comment in Las Vegas? Is there anyone wishing to testify in Carson City? BPS, is there anyone on the line to make public comment?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
It appears we do not have anyone who is prepared to provide public comment at this time, so we will move on to the next portion of the meeting. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the youth legislators for their participation at our last meeting on October 22nd, 2024. Today, we will discuss in more detail the two proposed bill draft requests elected at that meeting. We are fortunate to have witnesses who will provide testimony regarding our two BDR proposals today. We greatly appreciate these witnesses taking the time to be here and help us understand the BDR proposals and determine which proposed bill draft request to select. First, we need to address agenda item 4, which is the approval of the minutes from our September and October meetings. Each youth legislator has received a copy of the minutes from these meetings. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Youth Legislator Walsh.
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record, I would like to clarify that the school shooting in Sparks in 2013, which I referenced, resulted in the death of one teacher, the death of the perpetrator took his own life, and as well as 2 injured classmates, but they did survive. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now accept a motion to approve the minutes as amended. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I motion that we approve the minutes.
Youth Legislator Kane has made a motion to approve the minutes of our meetings held on September 26th, 2024 and October 22nd, 2024. Is there a second to the motion?
Seconded.
Youth Legislator Allen has seconded the motion. Is there any discussion on the motion regarding the minutes as amended? I'll take a vote on the motion now. All those in favor of the motion to approve the minutes as amended, please signify by saying yes.
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 Yes. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. The motion carries unanimously and the minutes are approved. The next item on our agenda is a discussion of our two final proposed BDRs and the selection of one BDR for presentation to the 2025 legislature. Each youth legislator will have 15 minutes to present their measure, followed by 10 minutes for questions from their colleagues. For the next 35 minutes, we will hear witness testimony regarding that specific BDR proposal. The 35-minute period includes witness presentations as well as the responses to youth legislators' questions. After that 35-minute period, the BDR proposal sponsor returns to the witness table to wrap up the presentation. Throughout the process, a timer will go off when there is 1 minute left for the youth legislator presentations. The question and answer periods, the 35-minute witness testimony periods, and the youth legislator wrap-ups. Please listen carefully to the presentation and testimony, as we will have the opportunity to provide suggestions in Agenda Item 6 after we select the BDR. The first BDR proposal we will discuss is BDR number 3. I will read the text of the BDR proposal for the record. This bill would require staff members of a school to report to the administrator of the school a pupil exhibiting behavior consistent with drug or tobacco use and require 1. The administrator notify the parent or guardian of the pupil and schedule a meeting with the parent or guardian. 2. A report be filed with the school. 3. Resources given to family. And 4. A follow-up meeting with the pupil. A report to law enforcement may be done if deemed necessary. Reports will also be made to the legislature with the pupil's personal information redacted. This BDR was proposed by Youth Legislator McCarthy, and she will now present it. You can go ahead and start when she's ready.
Youth Legislator McCarthy for the record. Good afternoon, youth legislators. Thank you for this opportunity to speak in front of you all again about my bill. Without the support you have all shown me this far, I would not have made it here, so for that I am grateful. When you are analyzing a story in elementary school, the teacher often asks you to answer 5 questions about the story or its main characters. Who, what, where, when, and how. So for a minute, I am going to tell you a story. Once upon a time, in a city with one of the highest drug rates in the country, a girl was sitting in art class, painting a poster while a class playlist was playing. The music, combined with each table group talking about various things, allowed for all the conversations to meld. But she overheard a group of 3 boys behind her talking. They were discussing the drugs that they would take if they could, if there were no consequences, if they had the access, if they had the money. They talked about shooting up on heroin and cocaine. They joked about fentanyl and laughed about who could come up with the, quote, best combinations. At that moment, they obviously did not consume drugs, but they had a fantasization of drugs and a nonchalant attitude towards taking them that was extremely alarming. All of the drug education and health class, and yet no regard for the dangers of drugs, seeing them instead as a punchline instead of something to be taken seriously. As I'm sure some of you might guess, that story happened to me last week in my art class. So first, I'm going to ask who. Who is being affected by drugs? Our entire communities. It starts with the adolescents who are consuming. I can give you the statistics, which you can also find on the stat sheet handed out. According to data collected by the Center of Disease Control in a 2016 report, 10.1% of children 12 years and older reported using illicit drugs within the last month, countrywide. In the same report, looking at just middle and high school age, 12 to 17 years old, 8.8% reported illicit drug use. That's over 2 million kids in the country, and as I've said previously, over 10,000 students in the state of Nevada. In other reports by the National Center of Drug Abuse, it was found that by the time adolescents are in 12th grade, 46.6 of them have tried illicit drugs. If we apply that statistic to our group, 10 out of the 21 youth legislators will have consumed illegal drugs by the time we graduate high school. But it's more than the numbers. It's our classmates. It's our siblings. It's their families that could be left reeling from a kid's drug habits. It's our firefighters who often go on more drug-related calls than fires. It's our law enforcement who see drugs every day. It's our court system dealing with both sides of illegal drug use, those using and their suppliers. It's our streets, our homeless. So many lives are affected every day by drug use. Not all of that is due to young people using, but the young people who are using are the ones that grow up to be the adults that are addicted. The adults that can't hold a job, might become suppliers themselves, have trouble supporting a family. It starts with kids our age and younger, and it starts with things like the glorification of drugs and no procedure or system in place to intervene when temptations win over and they start using. Now, what? Well, drugs. But what drugs? It could be anything from marijuana to narcotics. It could be a pill, a powder, a vapor. Cigarettes, vapes, opioids, cocaine, hallucinogens, methamphetamine, heroin, and more. And where does it all come from? Well, that is a bit of a different issue, whether it comes from a supplier or a parent, a friend or a stranger. Whatever it is getting into the hands of children. And once they have it, they have started down a path that leads to many dangerous consequences. And now a very important one. Where? Everywhere. I've heard of kids using it in a lot of places. Parties, parks, backyards, bedrooms, friends' houses, school bathrooms. But it is much broader than this. For me, I mostly see drug use in Las Vegas, as that is the city that I live in, have grown up in, and seen the most of. I've been to Reno and Carson City, and a few smaller Nevada towns, but I do not know the scene of these rural parts of the state nearly as well as I know my own city. That doesn't mean I can't get to know it. In my research, I found that the CDC reported in 2015 that in rural areas, rates of drug overdose deaths are rising and have surpassed rates in urban areas. Rural areas have a lower percentage of people reporting illicit drug use than urban areas. However, the effects of illicit drugs are higher in rural areas. Substance use can be extremely hard to combat in rural communities due to limited resources for prevention, treatment, and recovery. Higher percentages of drug use have been found in rural areas, specifically small metropolitan areas, concerning consumption of marijuana, cocaine, and hallucinogens. Additionally, there are even less avenues for intervention among rural areas. But public school is still a commonality that many rural students share, meaning it is a far-reaching network that extends to a majority of the target age group of my legislation. Using reports from the National Center for Education Statistics, an estimated 30,000 Nevada students located in rural areas are enrolled in public schools. That's 30,000 students that will see the benefits that I see in my own city from my legislation. All these statistics are to say that rural areas will also be impacted by drug use prevention legislation. This is not an issue that is isolated to cities or urban areas. It will impact the community of every single one of you. In person in front of me and up north. Now, when? I believe this is the easiest question to answer. 4 or 5 months from now at the session. That is my goal. It needs to be now. We need an immediate response to drugs because overdose deaths are increasing rapidly. Earlier this year, 8 News Now reported that in Nevada, 1,499 overdose deaths were reported, but the CDC's projections put that number at 1,603 by the time the data collection period is over, which would be the end of this year. That represents a 26.1% increase over the past 12 months. With trend increases like that, there is a huge need for more proactive solutions to drug use. We cannot sit back and wait for a large solution. We need to take smaller but crucial steps to start to curb the number of overdose deaths. We do that by identifying the starting point, which is childhood use of drugs. And finally, the most important piece, how? Since I met you last, I have talked to members of the school board, past legislators, and other invested parties. I have learned about the legislative history of other mandatory reporting programs. I have also looked more in depth at teacher training, cost, and time constraints. Because of the new information that I have decided to make a small change to my bill. The legislative intent of the bill has remained. Now, my bill will require the State Board of Education to create a policy for school administration to follow if a teacher has a concern about a student taking drugs. Once the policy is created, then each school will be required to adopt it. The procedures will be exactly the same or similar to the steps listed in my BDR description on the page you all have. The procedures will outline that if a teacher comes to administration with a concern, The administration will set up a meeting with the student, teacher, and parent or guardian of the student to discuss the concern. In that meeting, the teacher will explain why they believe that the student may be using drugs. For example, skipping class, talking about drugs, lack of focus and concentration when in class, and visual impairment signs such as dilation of pupils. The student will then be able to respond with the ability to either confirm or deny and explain the behavior if they are not using drugs. With the example I gave, the number of signs that the teacher witnessed makes it likely that the suspicion of drugs is true, but there are some overlap with concussion symptoms. Others align with mental health issues. It is intended that through the meeting, the student will be able to have a space where they can openly admit to using drugs, but in rare case, it might be that the student has another explanation. If that is the case, they will hopefully be able to get the medical or psychological help they may need for the other issue causing the impairment symptoms that were identified by the teacher. If the student is using drugs, the meeting would serve as a notification to the parents. This way, they know that there is a problem that they need to address with their child. In the meeting, they will be given resources, which could include but are not limited to family counseling resources, treatment center contact and enrollment information, and specified drug resource groups or therapy programs. The shift from a mandatory reporting to a mandated policy means that teachers are facing much fewer liability concerns, as they are not, by law, required to report everything they see or suspect. They are encouraged to report and have an avenue to do so, as it will have the child's best interest at heart, but they cannot be penalized for failing to report a student who may have been exhibiting drug behaviors. Without the mandated reporting, the responsibility is not forced onto them. Instead, they have the ability to assume it. This can help teachers who may be facing more immediate concerns than spotting drug use, such as keeping violence out of classrooms and keeping truancy rates low. I have spoken to some teachers whose first priority in the classroom falls to such issues. At the same time, the inclusion of this policy gives teachers an avenue to handle drugs showing up in their classrooms or drug concerns they have. I have also spoken to multiple teachers who have dealt with drug behaviors or students physically having drugs in class. These teachers do not have a set way to handle it. In one case, the teacher had to treat drugs, specifically vapes, like a phone, taking it away from the kid and returning it at the end of class, as their admin had no policy for them to do anything more. In another, students were talking about drug indulgences they had participated in, and when brought to the administration, they told the teacher to let it go because they do not have any procedure for speaking with the student or family. My legislation has the ability to empower teachers to give them a path forward when they are faced with drugs interrupting their class flow or affecting their students' lives. And it has the power to change the trajectory of the drug rates in our state. By implementing this legislation and therefore notifying parents of drug use, we are creating a larger network of informed and invested individuals to surround all the kids in our state who are dealing with drug abuse. We are working for them, and they are who we need to be working on. Because drug use isn't a yearly thing. It doesn't come around once in a decade. The last time drug use destroyed a school community wasn't 2013, when we had our most recent high school shooting. Drug use happens every day, every hour. It is happening right now, and it will happen tomorrow and the next day until we act, until we take charge and change it. I implore you all to take charge with me. Stand up to drug use. Stand up with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Legislator McCarthy. Do any youth legislators have questions regarding this BDR proposal? Youth Legislator Kane.
Can you clarify exactly what changed about the bill? Because I'm slightly confused.
Yes, I can. Previously, the bill had been intended to be a mandatory reporting program for teachers. I'm going to use a different example to explain it that already exists. Mandatory reporting exists for child abuse. If a teacher believes a child is being abused, they are required by state law to report it. If they don't, and someone believes they had the knowledge that the child was being abused and didn't report, they can be held liable for that. Changing it to a mandated policy at all schools means that the same procedures I outlined in my BDR snippet that you all have are in place, but teachers are not by law required to use it. Instead, they have the opportunity to use it, which I've heard many have tried to do, and since the procedures were not in place, they couldn't. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Do any youth legislators have questions? Youth Legislator Nguyen.
Youth Legislator Wynn, for the record. Will there be any training set in place to help the teachers and administrators, identify the drug use behaviors and without bias?
So when a new policy is created by the State Board of Education, they're required to train teachers on said new policy. You might find an example in the phone pouches we were all using this year. Probably there was not much training on that, except that it is required to be used. Because the school board is required to create the new training, they have to use what is already in their budget. So they do not have, to my knowledge, a fiscal impact added. It is just rearranging. I have found multiple websites that do a fantastic job at explaining the physical and mental impairment that students could be facing with drug use that could be easily transformed into a 30-minute PowerPoint sent to teachers just to inform them of what the symptoms and signs look like.
Thank you. Any youth legislators in the north? I can't. Is Youth Legislator Chang, is that right? Or Youth Legislator Allen, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Two quick questions for you. One, just quickly clarifying, vapes would fall under tobacco use in the language of this bill, correct?
Yes, they would.
Okay. And then I believe you provided this further in other testimony, but I would just appreciate it again. How do we avoid or prevent this bill turning into a way to penalize students, or I guess, in essence, get them in trouble, and to have it end up on their permanent record for school systems?
So the avenue that reporting that goes on inside of schools gets on a child's criminal record is usually referred to as the school to prison pipeline. However, in Nevada, the Legislative Analysis of Public Policy reports that we have the jurisdiction to disrupt the school to prison pipeline via laws or regulations that do not require a drug-related incident at school to be reported to the police. Therefore, the incident could stay contained within the school system and never reach their permanent record, meaning that if they are on drugs or if it somehow does become a mistaken report, it does not affect them long-term, except for hopefully getting them the help that they need. So there is really no harm, no foul in creating the policy. That's kind of a safeguard so that hopefully it does not hurt a child long-term, because obviously we do not want it to be on their permanent record and hurt them from employment later, admittance into colleges, and anything else.
Okay, so essentially law enforcement kind of stays out of the question under the limitations of this bill?
Yes, they do, unless it is determined that the parent might be unable to address the student's drug problem, which can get kind of a blurred line, but that is intended so that if the parent might have their own drug problem and be facilitating the child's drug problem, which I do know a girl that was the case for her, then law enforcement might be called, but more in a way of social services to remove that child or manage that child's situation because they are in a dangerous situation.
Perfect, that helps. I appreciate that clarification.
Okay, thank you. Any other youth legislators in the north? Please go ahead and just jump on the microphone. I can't see very well right now.
Youth Legislator Chang, for the record. So again, I was just concerned about building off of Youth Legislator Allen. So what exactly is the threshold to quote unquote clear your name? So if I'm reported for exhibiting some of these symptoms, what exactly is the threshold to not have that grow into something else? What exactly is the threshold at which this reporting process says, okay, you're not using drugs, you can go off with your day?
Well, if the original incident is found to be untrue and the student was never using drugs, there will be no follow-up report. There is no need to continue with anything related to this legislation. If they are found to be using drugs, I hope that the policy includes a follow-up in 2 to 4 months, maybe more, depending on what the parent does with the child. More so to determine if the parent is taking the appropriate steps to manage the drug problem. That would hopefully be a way for the school to determine if maybe the parent is unfit. If not, a second report or a second conference where the child either the school is informed that the parents have taken counseling steps, therapy steps, or even just an in-person meeting with the child where they have a conversation about if things are going better and if they're getting help that they feel like is addressing the problem, it can go away within the school system. And since it's never reaching the criminal system, there is no need to get it off their record per se. It will only be a report that is stored at the school.
So then
All right,
how
thank
would
you. You can continue.
Okay. So then how would you determine they're not using drugs?
The school is not going to be responsible to determine if they are not using drugs, because the main legislative intent is to inform the parents of the child, who are their legal guardian, and have the capability to address the drug problem. Obviously, a school cannot enroll a child in drug counseling services or pay for it. So the intent of the bill is to get the parents notified, and then the parent is hopefully taking the steps to make sure that the drug problem is managed and eventually eliminated.
All right, thank you. Youth Legislator Walsh.
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record, I just wanted to ask a two-part question, but in your testimony, you said that you would hope the meetings that had the student and the teacher, as well as their parents and possibly the administrator, as with the amended part of your bill, you said you would like them to have a space to admit to their drug problem. If a child is sitting in front of their parents, a teacher, and an administrator, all authoritative adults in their lives, what happens if the child doesn't admit to a drug problem? And then going off to what you just said about you hope that parents, when they're notified, will take the right actions to help their child. What's the next step if the parent doesn't? And thank you.
I will try to answer them as best as I can. If I have to have you remind me of the second one after I answer the first, I will. So obviously, I understand that many students might not admit it. The bigger purpose of the meeting is if the student might be struggling with something else. For example, concussion symptoms, as I mentioned, can look similar to drug use. Dilation of pupils is a common occurrence in an individual who is using drugs, and also a common occurrence in a student athlete who may have a concussion, possibly undiagnosed or diagnosed. Lack of focus are also two things that occur together. So let's say I'm a student athlete and a teacher is concerned because I'm exhibiting some symptoms of a concussion. Maybe I'm a football player and I got it in practice and don't know. Then the meeting, you'd say, I don't have a drug problem. I think this other issue might be going on. Or another example, Tourette syndrome, ticking, can be similar to bodily responses to drugs. So the one avenue is that the student should be able to advocate for themselves if they are not on drugs. If they have no other explanation, you can, in a way, put two and two together. I believe if a student is not on drugs, they will advocate for themselves. If they are, and they still advocate for themselves, it can be up to the parents to do further testing, take them to a physician to do stuff like drug testing. But some will admit it, some might not. But if they've never had a space before, at least it does give them the chance. It's better than no policy at all. Second part of the question, can you remind me of it?
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record. My second part, you kind of just said it, but when you said that you would like this meeting to also give a space for parents to be notified if their child is on drugs, or at least have knowledge of it, what happens if the parent doesn't do anything following up? Thank you.
If the parent doesn't do anything at all following up.
Youth Legislator, your time's up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Legislator McCarthy. Next, we have witnesses who have generously come to testify regarding this BDR proposal. Would the witnesses who are ready to testify on BDR 3 please come to the table to begin at this time?
My first witness is not here in person. Sorry, I apologize if you guys got up. So I'm going to be reading testimony for her. Obviously, that means you cannot question anything because I cannot speak for her. These are only the words that she was able to provide me. She said, "My name is Mahani Williams. I am a Las Vegas native and have been a resident for most of my life. I grew up here and graduated from schools that many would say were unsafe and are not fit for any child. However, we were instilled with the knowledge of how to say no to drugs and knew what our resources were. I've been employed with Clark County Family Services for 24 years, advocating to protect children and keep them safe. Over the years, our city has seen a large increase in drug-related causes and criminal activity amongst our children as young as elementary aged. I have a daughter who is currently 31 years old. She was born and raised here, went to great schools in affluent neighborhoods. I thought that raising her in an environment that I did not grow up in would benefit her, but it was more of a detriment. She was offered drugs in high school and her addiction began at the age of 16. She was a sweet girl and never in trouble. When I addressed it with the school, they were dismissive and said that there was nothing they could do. I attempted to reach out for help through substance abuse/mental health programs, but hit dead ends everywhere I turned. My daughter is now deep into her addiction, in and out of jail and released to the streets with no resources. I have adopted my grandbaby, who is almost 11 years old. He was born drug exposed and has had to face many challenges. If there were better resources and support in place for families, I believe my daughter would have had a different outcome in life. As a parent, I know I missed many signs that she had started abusing prescription pills. I often thought her demeanor was a phase or something else less serious. I am not alone in this. Parents can and absolutely will miss the signs of drug use, and they are far too accessible. Educators and teachers are a widespread network that reach almost all children. With teachers having a policy to report and handle student drug use, they're helping pick up warning signs that parents might not see, so that we can get services early for their children. That's why I support BDR 3. Our children deserve it. Our community needs it. It is vital to protecting this drug epidemic from spreading even more than it already has.
Thank you. And if the other witnesses could please come to the table, that would be great. We have someone up north. Is that right? Awesome. Thank you. So if the witness is ready up in Northern Nevada to testify on BDR 3, you may please begin. Remember to please state and spell your name for the record. Explain who you are representing today and begin your testimony when ready. Thank you.
Good afternoon, youth legislators. My name is Kristen McGill. I am the Deputy Superintendent for the Nevada Department of Education, and I get the joy to work for you all. One of my tasks was to take a look to see if what is proposed is possible. And so when I look at the 1, the administrator notify, the parent or guardian, 2, a report, 3, resources given, and 4, a follow-up meeting with the pupil, is very similar to practices that are currently going on now. So the answer to that question is yes, it is feasible to do this. My other piece I wanted to bring to you all was, does this align to evidence-based practices? So there are best practices when it comes to dealing with issues like this. So I first want to say congratulations on taking hold of a pretty complex mental health issue like substance abuse. So one of the considerations I want to bring to you all to consider is the role, and several other states have gone in this direction as well, because when I hear about the intent of what you all really want to do is to make sure that these students are getting the help they need before it gets too late. That's kind of the intent I hear. So one of the actions that we in Nevada have started and are implementing is a system called multi-tiered systems of support. So that is when a student starts to struggle, that a teacher can report that, hey, I'm really kind of concerned with this student, and something called screening occurs. So in that screening process, a screening could be done for substance abuse if that worry was about that. And so aligning some of the language to that evidence-based multi-systems of support is my humble recommendation. The second piece is if you all were very interested in getting a little more upstream, Washington State just proposed what's called a universal mental health screener for students in the middle school and also in high school. And that is a screener that is done very similar to how you get your vision or your hearing screened when you are young. The mental health screener would be something similar done by school counselors, school psychs, or school nurses, or community health workers. And it is a parental consent. It could look several different ways, but it is an evidence-based screener that talks around the mental health components that underlie substance abuse coping mechanisms. So by identifying the problem earlier through these screeners is one way that if you all were really interested in trying to really make sure this wasn't a disciplinary event and making sure it was a support, that universal mental health screening could be a direction that you all can consider. I'm welcome, if you guys have any questions around those two recommendations, I am more than happy to take them.
Do we take questions? Do we take questions now or? Yes.
Just for clarification, we've allocated 35 minutes total for all the witnesses and Q&A. So we have to be cognizant of time so that everybody has the opportunity to do the questions and responses, but we want to make sure that all the witnesses have the opportunity to appear at the table.
All right, perfect. So we're now going to take some time for questions. Do any youth legislators have questions for the witness? And I can't see the north, so if you're up north, you can go ahead and get on the microphone. But first off, Youth Legislator Chen.
I did have a question Youth Legislator Chen for the record. I did have a question regarding the screenings and how that would align with, I know you mentioned mental health screenings that school counselors might do. When it comes to data, is it do you see it having a self-reported data aspect to it? Because as I understand, like the mental health screenings that are provided to us by our school counselors, when they are self-reported, there's definitely a higher likelihood of just having like neutral answers or untrue answers. So yeah, that's my question.
Christy McGill for the record, thank you for your question. So screeners can have multiple forms. So yes, they could be a screener where it asks the student themselves. One of the benefits of going with a more general mental health screener is that this generation and students are a little bit more comfortable about talking about mental health than they are about substance abuse. And again, it could be the precursor to substance abuse behavior. There's also screeners that are observations by teachers, by school counselors, by parents. And so really taking a look at if one of these screeners looks like there may be a concern, there are other screeners and then assessment processes to really kind of get at the issue early on. So yes, it can be in the form of a student saying, yes, I have a problem. And it can also be the form of concern of either teachers and parents.
Thank you. Youth Legislator Allen.
Youth Legislator Allen for the record. Just two quick questions for you. One, with the multi-tiered systems of support, that's its name, correct? Would that, just kind of understanding both sides and it being already implemented in schools, is it a large burden on teachers already to make that report process, or is it something that they are comfortable with and something that they feel that they can accomplish throughout the day as it becomes necessary?
Christy McGill for the record. Great question. So multi-tier systems of support is a system. Not all schools are implementing it with fidelity because it does take a lot of time and effort to implement. But what it really does, that if a teacher has a concern, that concern goes to a team, which then discusses the concern, and it's a team approach about how to move next. And again, the emphasis really is on intervention and early intervention and not on discipline or following up with treatment. The evidence shows, and we have data here, if you guys are interested, I can provide you data to show that when schools are implementing multi-tiered systems of support, behaviors and disciplines go down and interventions go up. So yes, It is difficult to implement, but the teachers that are, they have reported that once the system is up and going, they actually have a team to report their concerns with, and they don't have to deal with it all on their own.
Thank you for that. And then looking at Washington State and the mental health screening, would that first in Nevada look like starting with mental health screening and then further moving it into drug screening? Or would it start off in Nevada as a similar system but intended for drug screening and then action is taken from there?
Christy McGill for the record. So the recommendation is to grow broader into mental health because substance abuse is a part of mental health, right? It is a coping mechanism of somebody who may be struggling. So the recommendation is to go with a broader approach around mental health. And then if it looks like there's issues, then there's screeners that specifically speak to substance abuse disorders, and then there is interventions to help with those substance abuse disorders as well. So to kind of start broad at first and then kind of go down, because you really want to hit the primary cause. If it's trauma, if it is, let's say a young person is struggling with anxiety and is self-medicating, you really want to get to the condition that may be underlying the drug use behavior.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And for the sake of time, we're going to move on to the next witnesses. If they could please come up to the table for BDR3, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you all. And so if you could please state and spell your name for the record, explain who you are representing today, and begin your testimony when ready.
Hello, my name is Ryan Tyler. I'm here representing Clark County Firefighters Local 1908. In that role, we have a particular skill set and a responsibility, and that's to track trends and ensure that proper treatment modalities are being used and that they're comparable to others being used across the country. And so just to kind of go back to what Youth Legislator McCarthy's story was talking about, she overheard a story about shooting up. To put it in perspective, I'm the one that runs those calls when things go bad. And so to break that down a little bit more, last year, our department ran 3,433 calls for overdose-related incidences, which is a little over 9 per day. Of those, 138 are under the age of 18, which comes out to about 1 every 2.5 days. That is a pretty astounding number, but those are the calls that we're running. And my area in particular is surrounded by 9 schools, 2 of which are high schools, which kind of speaks to the high concentration of students in that area. To put you in one of the scenes that we run, when we walk into a house of one of these calls where there's an adolescent, there is nothing worse than when the parent says, I don't know. I don't know what my child took. I don't know what they're taking. I don't know what happened. Not having the information to be able to treat them appropriately is pretty difficult for us to be able to handle those as well. It's very clear in those types of situations that the adolescent needed an invested party to help provide a path to early intervention, education, and prevention to address substance abuse. And I want to be clear that it's not only overdoses that we're running. All of the other things that Youth Legislator McCarthy stated about vaping and other stimulants, those are also calls that we're running for those same people. And so lung issues for vaping or heart problems for stimulant use, those are also calls that we're running and all associated with this. I'm going to end it there to make sure my partners here have enough time to testify.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Fraser, FRA, S as in Sam, ER. I'm representing the Public Defender's Office. Specifically, I work at the Juvenile Division. I actually handle our juvenile drug court, so I'm in there every week. So I'm keenly aware of the issues some of our youth struggle with substance use. I want to commend the presenter and I do appreciate the change from amending from a mandatory reporting scheme to the mandated policy. I think that's a positive change. I would also just like to focus with my viewpoint is when there was discussions, and I appreciated a lot of the youth legislator questions about the meeting and law enforcement getting involved, because obviously those are my concerns as well. I think the goal, or at least my suggestion would be, the goal is not necessarily to catch someone using or to focus on getting them to admit during a meeting, because as a questioner pointed out, that might not be a safe space for the youth. And I think there's a lot of shame surrounding substance use. So I think just the goal of, I would like to see the goal, and I think that's what the intent of this legislation is to offer as many resources and services to the parent, because as we just heard, sometimes the parents just don't know and they're asking for help, but they're not getting it. So if that meeting can just be used to give, we're another adult that's seeing this kid struggle and we want to offer more services and resources, I would like that to be the goal of this legislation because of those issues. That was the only suggestion or how I wanted you guys to think about it moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us. My name is John Puro. I'm the Assistant Public Defender for the Clark County Public Defender's Office. I work with Jennifer Fraser. Just like Ms. Fraser said, we are glad that we removed the mandatory reporting part. We think that might have caused some issues of concern for us. There are other things that I wanted to talk about that y'all talked about a little bit here too. Some things can appear like they're drug use, like a concussion, like Youth Legislator McCarthy said, or neurodivergence. Somebody who has autism doesn't always present in a way that maybe an administrator thinks they should present. They see that in DUI stops where they stop somebody for drunk driving and they're really not drunk. They actually have a neurodivergence issue, but then are accused of that. And I would hate to see a student stuck with that on a record or have to clear their name in a meeting with administrators and their parents for that issue. So those are things that I think we should talk about. But I think if y'all take Deputy Superintendent McGill's suggestions, I think this bill could become quite a powerful bill that could make a difference for our students on such a heavy issue. And I'm grateful that y'all are taking up an issue just like this to kind of deal with some of the problems in our state. So if we move towards a more evidence-based solution, when y'all hammer out that language, I think this could be a bill that would remove a lot of our concerns.
Thank you for your testimony today. Do any legislators have any questions for the witnesses? I will ask one of both of the individuals from that are attorneys here. So what would the legal considerations be if we did adopt the screening process? If a teacher reported to administration that an individual is exhibiting behavior consistent with drug use or substance abuse, and then they reach out to administrator, reaches out to the parent, what kind of legal considerations are there any legal considerations to watch out for in that scenario? Would that be through normal channels of communication, fine, or would it be would at one point it become harassment if that's done? And could there be items put in place if those kinds of reports are done for that kind of screening in excess?
All right, Jennifer Fraser for the record. I don't see the concerns. I agree that the recommendations for doing the full assessment so you get the underlying cause for why there's substance use. I think if you're then offering, and if it's just that's the standard that the school is using, then individual kids aren't being targeted. So I think that's important. And then you're offering those services to parents. I think I was a little concerned when I was hearing like we might have follow-up meetings and referring parents to law enforcement. That's where I would be concerned, but just adopting a uniform screening and offering services and resources to families, I think is a positive all around.
And John Pirro for the record. And you brought up a good point that we didn't even think about. I think maybe when you're hammering out the language of this, like making sure that it's not being used as a tool for harassment, I think is something to take into consideration when you're formulating the final language of this bill.
I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of awesome ideas, and I appreciate you guys for coming today and sharing those with us, especially the interim superintendent of North. Thank you. All right, any youth legislators have any questions at this time?
Youth Legislator
In
Allen,
North.
for the record,
Yes.
really quickly, would you say that your director of the two lawyers down in the South, believe that your overall office's goal, especially pertaining to drug use amongst youth, would be rehabilitation, and that further measures to revise the language or to implement Deputy Superintendent suggestions kind of help follow suit in that?
Jennifer Fraser for the record, 100% the goal is rehabilitation. Substance use is a mental health issue. So, and it's a health concern. It's not, I don't think it should be based in punitive. So yes, I think it's rehabilitative, and that's something that our office would support.
And John Pirro for the record, you hit the nail on the head, Youth Legislator Allen. We're definitely all about rehabilitation. We want to, especially in our juveniles, we want to catch the problem before it makes it to the adult system. So we want to catch it way before then.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
Youth Legislator up North, Legislator Chang, go ahead.
So building off of this theme of rehabilitation, so you mentioned that there might be some problematic portions of requiring students to sort of seek resources. Is there any legally unproblematic way to ensure that students are getting the help they need, after the reporting process is done, or?
John Pirro for the record. I think one of the things that popped out to me is, and this would have to be with tweaking the language, I think it can be done, but one of the things that was concerning for me was a report to law enforcement may be done if deemed necessary, meaning that the parents don't have the resources. And what popped out to me was this may only affect kids that are poor. When I was a child, my parents would not have had the resources to put me in rehab. Now, as an adult, as an attorney, if I had a child with a substance abuse issue, I do have those resources now. My life is a lot different than it was when I was your age. So I would caution y'all to think about how to craft that language so it's not unintentionally targeting children whose parents do not have the resources, and it's putting them in proper resources without necessarily getting the police involved. But I think that Deputy Superintendent McGill's suggestion of using evidence-based methods may be able to lead you in that direction.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time? Youth Legislator Cohen.
For our two witnesses from the Public Defender's Office, can you just please clarify the legal opinion on the mandatory reporting? Thank you.
Jump here for the record. When you say clarify, can you tell me a little bit more?
I know you mentioned it in your testimony. I was just wondering if you could go over what you said just one more time so I can just take note of it.
John Pirro for the record. Removing the mandatory reporter, kind of like Youth Legislator McCarthy said, and not putting the onus so much on teachers. They already have to do it for child abuse and so many other things. You all are still in the classroom, and you know how much your teachers are doing every day. So making it a way for teachers to jump in more actively, but not holding them accountable. If a teacher does not report child abuse, they could be held criminally liable for that. And I don't think we would want to do that for our teachers for this. And I think that's why Youth Legislator McCarthy kindly changed that part of her bill. And I think that's a great change.
Thank you. Any other youth legislators have questions at this time in the South? Seeing none in the North. All right, I think we are good. Thank you so much for your time today and coming to speak with us. We greatly appreciate it. All right. Youth Legislator McCarthy may now proceed with a final statement regarding your proposed BDR.
Youth Legislator McCarthy for the record. First, I'd like to clarify a few things. I did not draft the snippet that you've all received, and I believe my witnesses received, that at the end uses language, the words deemed necessary. The intent is only for law enforcement to be called if there is strong reason to believe the parent has their own drug problem and is therefore facilitating the drug problem of the child. I had a middle school classmate who openly discussed the fact that her mother was an opioid addict, was not careful with where she left pills around, and she was taking her mother's pills. That is a case where I believe law enforcement does need to be contacted, and then subsequently social services, to try to iron out that home situation. I do not want any parents who might not have the financial resources to address it as much as another parent would to be penalized. It is only if they might be facilitating or allowing the drug problem, which is sadly existent in some cases, not most, but some. The other thing I'd like to say is I greatly appreciate all of the insight that my witnesses were able to provide and all of you having so much interest in helping adopt this bill. If it gets voted through today, it is no longer mine, it is ours, and I want everyone to feel that their voice was heard in making it. And all of you have wonderful suggestions and personal experience and also knowledge that you can draw from to improve it. Other than that, I would just like to one more time reiterate that drugs are everywhere in our communities. They're in our classrooms. I, for one, can identify multiple kids at my school who have talked about or may be using drugs. I believe that they exhibit behaviors that if teachers were to report would be consistent with drug use, and hopefully that would lead them to getting help from their parents, from professionals, just from having parents in their lives notified. I think that's it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Youth Legislator McCarthy. Before we continue, are there any additional questions or comments from any youth legislator regarding this BDR proposal? Seeing none, we will now begin the hearing on the second proposal, BDR number 6. I will read the text of the BDR proposal for the record. Existing law authorizes a parent or guardian to be held civilly liable when his or her child uses a firearm if 1, the parent or guardian authorized the child to use or possess the firearm, 2, the child used the firearm in a negligent manner or for willful misconduct, and 3, the minor has been previously adjudicated or convicted, has a propensity for violence, or knows the minor intends to use the firearm for unlawful purpose. This bill would remove the requirement that the parent or guardian had any knowledge of potential misuse of the firearm, thereby authorizing a parent or guardian to be civilly liable whenever a child uses a parent's firearm negligently or for willful misconduct. This bill would also make a violation of this law category B felony punishable by 1 to 20 years in prison. This BDR was proposed by Youth Legislator Walsh. When you are ready, please present your BDR proposal.
Good afternoon. I am Youth Legislator Alexa Walsh. I am 17 years old. 5 years ago in 2019, I woke up on a Monday morning and was headed to class. I was 12 and I walked into my first class of the day, my favorite class and my favorite teacher. I remember looking at the clock, thinking about when the bell would ring and I would be headed to my next class. What I didn't know then was that when the bell did ring for second period, I would not leave my class. I would not leave my class because my school was put under lockdown. Why? Because a student at my school had brought a loaded firearm onto my middle school's campus. The firearm was legally owned by one of his parents. I sat there in my classroom as the police searched for the loaded firearm. I remember thinking, I want my mom, I want to go home. Was that morning the last time I'd ever speak to my mom? It was a very real thought that I had at 12 years old. It's a very real thought that too many children in Nevada have had. According to everytown.org, an organization dedicated to reporting national gun violence statistics, as of 2022, guns are the leading cause of death among children and teens in Nevada. An average of 41 children and teens die by guns every year, 43% of these deaths being suicide. In the state of Nevada, a minor cannot legally own or obtain a firearm. So how is it that Nevada children are able to shoot themselves or others? They are accessing firearms that were negligently left available to them by their parents, legal guardians, or those legally responsible for them. Since speaking about this BDR back in October, another child in Nevada was hospitalized after being accidentally shot with a firearm by another minor. As of November 10th, according to 8 News Now and Sparks, 2 juveniles were playing with a firearm, and it resulted in the shooting of one and the arrest of another. Where they obtained the firearm is not yet known. However, the Sparks Police Department did strongly remind people to, quote, secure their firearms in a safe place which is not accessible to children, end quote. Sometimes a reminder isn't enough. It wasn't enough for the parents of the 12-year-old who used their firearm to shoot himself, a teacher, and injure 2 students in Sparks in 2013. It wasn't enough for the parents of a 12-year-old boy who shot and killed his 14-year-old brother with a parent's firearm in Henderson in 2024. It wasn't enough for the parents of a 14-year-old boy who shot and killed his 10-year-old brother with a parent's firearm in Henderson of 2022. It wasn't enough for the parents of a 10-year-old boy who accidentally shot and killed himself with his parents' firearm in Elko in 2020. It wasn't enough for the parents of a 2-year-old boy who accidentally shot and killed himself with his parents' gun in 2023 in Las Vegas. I could go on and on and on. According to a youth suicide study done by the Nevada Legislature, 77 children aged 10 through 17 in Nevada died by suicide in 2017 through 2020 alone, with 34 of those deaths being by firearms. Again, a minor in the state of Nevada cannot legally own and obtain a firearm. However, there are still children in Nevada dying at the hands of their peers and themselves, accidental or not. This is an issue. This is a dire issue. It isn't just a matter of what's right and wrong. It's a matter of looking at your classmate next to you and saying, I hope I see you tomorrow. I hope you don't find a firearm negligently left out by your parent or guardian. I hope you don't misuse the firearm and accidentally shoot yourself or your sibling. I hope you don't walk home and your friend says to you they found their parent's gun and you two should play with it and one of you is shot. I hope you don't go into a party and someone is there with their parent's firearm, which they access through their negligence, and that minor shoots you and you die alone thinking what I thought in 2019. I want my mom. I want to go home. We need a solution. Bill Draft Request 6 can be a solution. So one day you can go to class and say to that friend, I will see you tomorrow. Nevada law, NRS 41.472, currently states that for a parent, legal guardian, or those legally responsible for a minor to be held civilly liable for their minor's willful misconduct or negligence with their legally owned firearm, 3 criteria must be met. 1, the adult in question left the firearm accessible to the minor. 2, the minor used the firearm in a negligent manner or willful misconduct. The adult must know, or 3, the adult must know the minor either has been convicted of a criminal offense, has propensity to commit violence, or the adult knew that their child was going to use a firearm for unlawful purposes. So according to Nevada law, if a 4-year-old accessed their parent's handgun and was accidentally shot by his 2-year-old brother, and accidentally shot his 2-year-old brother, the parents would not be held liable. Or if a 3-year-old boy accessed his parent's firearm and accidentally shot and killed himself, the parents would not be held liable. These aren't made-up situations. The first happened in 2018 in Las Vegas. The second happened a year prior in Las Vegas. Those are 2 incidents out of many, very easily preventable incidents. To make sure parents, BDR 6 acts as both a punitive and a deterring measure. To make sure parents, legal guardians, and those who are legally responsible for their minor are accountable when their negligence leads to their minor using their firearm for willful misconduct. Also to make known to parents, legal guardians, and those who are legally responsible for a minor to be a responsible gun owner and keep their firearm safely stowed away from their child. When a 12-year-old boy had shot and killed his 14-year-old brother in Henderson earlier this year using his parents' legally owned firearm, the father of the boys had admitted to police that, quote, he knew it was negligent to leave firearms unsecured and all over the house, end quote. According to Henderson Fox 5 News in February of 2024. He knew it was negligent to leave the firearms unsecured and all over the house. I want you to process that. He knew it was wrong. He knew it was negligent. So why did he not care? Because he knew he wasn't going to be held accountable for his actions. Like I said, there are very restrictive requirements that must be met for a parent, legal guardian, or someone legally responsible for a minor to be held liable for their minor's willful misconduct with their firearm, which he knew his situation didn't meet. Even further, if he did meet those criteria, which I outlined in your handouts and previously mentioned in this testimony, he could only be held civilly liable, meaning someone could only sue him and his family. In civil liability cases, it is usually the victim or the victim's family that seeks financial compensation. What is he going to do? Sue himself? It is his son that is dead. It is his other son that committed the murder with his firearm. This is why BDR 6 plans to remove the criteria that a parent, legal guardian, or those legally responsible for a minor had to know their minor was previously convicted of a crime, has a propensity to commit violent acts, or the adult knew the minor was going to use the firearm for willful misconduct. BDR 6 also outlines that if a parent, legal guardian, or an adult legally responsible for a minor negligently allows access of their firearm to their minor, they can be held criminally liable. A violation of this law would be a Class B felony, which is punishable by 1 to 20 years in prison. A Category B felony has the widest range in sentencing guidelines to give the decision makers opportunity to make their sentencing decisions based on the merits of each case, so the consequence fits the crime. This BDR is also not new. Many states have what are called child access prevention laws, where the proposal I described is implemented. Parents, legal guardians, or those legally responsible for a minor can be held criminally liable for their minor's willful misconduct of the adult's legally owned firearm. According to the nonprofit organization Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, founded by former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords after she was shot in the face in 2011, these states all have laws similar to my proposal. California, District of Columbia, Minnesota, Rhode Island, Vermont, Virginia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Oregon, Delaware, Hawaii, Maryland, and New Jersey. This is not including states like Michigan and Georgia, which have sought criminal liability for parents or legal guardians who negligently allow access of their firearm to their minor. Why do proposals like these in BDR 6 work? According to Giffords Law Center, studies show that, quote, child access prevention laws can reduce suicide and unintentional gun deaths and injuries among children and teens. One study found that these laws were associated with a 13% reduction in all firearm fatalities among 0 to 14-year-olds, which demonstrated decreases in firearm homicides, 15%, firearm suicides, 12%, and unintentional firearm deaths, 13% for children of these ages. Studies show that between 70 and 90% of guns used in youth suicides, unintentional shootings among children, and school shootings perpetuated by shooters under the age of 18 are acquired from the home or the home of friends and relatives. Several studies show that the risk of suicide and unintentional shootings among youth increases in homes where guns are kept locked and or unloaded, end quote. Currently, 4.6 million minors in the U.S. live in homes with at least one unlocked firearm. The hard truth is many children know where their parents keep their firearms and have access to them through their parents' negligence. Nevada is no different. As of 2022, according to CBS News, there are over 119,000 licenses in the state of Nevada for firearms. And as of the 2020 census, there are around 750,000 children in the state of Nevada. To put those numbers into place, Indiana, for example, according to CBS News, had only about 38,000 more licenses in Nevada. But Indiana, according to the 2020 census, has double our population with 6.8 million compared to our 3.1 million. According to Giffords Law Center, household guns, often the most easily accessible firearms for youth, are a major source of weapons used in school shootings, youth suicides, and unintentional shooting deaths among children. Nevada is no different. This BDR is about protecting Nevada's youth. It is about holding parents, legal guardians, and those legally responsible for a minor accountable for their negligent actions. This law and logic is not new. NRS 202.485 states that if a parent, legal guardian, or a person leaves their child under 7 in a hot car and that child dies, they can be held criminally liable. It doesn't matter if the parent or legal guardian didn't mean for it to happen. It still happened and it can still be held criminally liable. NRS 200.508 states if a parent or legal guardian acts negligently and this results in bodily harm of that minor, they can still be held criminally liable. If a parent or guardian were to leave their infant child unattended in a bathtub and that child drowns, it does not matter if the adult in question did not mean for it to happen. It still happened and they can still be held criminally liable. It is negligent to leave a firearm, a weapon, accessible to a minor. A minor in the state of Nevada cannot legally purchase or obtain a firearm. A minor having access to a firearm is not only a danger to themselves, but to others. If a minor has access to a firearm, it does not just affect the minor or their family. It affects you, it affects me, and every single person. Only 4 months into the school year, in just Clark County School District alone, as reported in the firearm confiscation report available, 9 firearms were confiscated on or near school property by a juvenile, all of them being students of those schools. It affects every single one of those 750,000 children in Nevada. That minor could be your classmate or your sibling. You might not even know that minor, but they are out there. Before 2019, I did not believe this, but that minor was my classmate. That minor was that classmate who brought a loaded firearm onto my middle school campus. Again, a minor cannot legally purchase and obtain a firearm. It is a legal firearm's duty to properly stow away that firearm. When you were a child, your parents would tell you not to touch a hot stove. Your teachers would tell you not to run around with scissors. It doesn't matter that it's not your stove or it's not your scissors. It's because a parent, legal guardian, or a person who is legally responsible for a minor has a duty to keep their minor safe. If a parent, legal guardian, or person who is legally responsible for a minor turns on a stove and leaves access to the open flame and the minor injures themselves by accessing it, it is neglect. It is the adult's fault. It is time we must take the right actionable steps and apply this logic to firearms. Firearms are instruments of force and can injure or kill another person. Just as the family of the teacher who was shot and killed by a 14-year-old boy, a 12-year-old boy who accessed his parents' firearm after it was negligently left available to him in Sparks in 2013. Those parents were not found liable despite that firearm being theirs and their negligent actions resulting in the death of their son, that teacher, and 2 others injured. In 2019, when I was sitting in my classroom while police officers on campus searched for a loaded firearm, I thought, I want my mom, I want to go home. My wishes to see my mom and my home were granted. Not every youth in Nevada has these wishes granted because of a parent, legal guardian, or those legally responsible for a minor negligently leaving access to their firearms to their minor. You can change that. Let your friends, your siblings, and your classmates go home to their families. Let their wishes be granted. Vote BDR 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Legislator McCarthy. Walsh, excuse me. Thank you, Legislator Walsh. Do any youth legislators have questions regarding this BDR proposal?
This is Youth Legislator Allen for the record. Can you provide me what your definition is for a parent to, quote, act negligently?
As stated in the handout that I provided, as well as my testimony, Youth Legislator Walsh for the record, if a parent were to leave their firearm accessible to a minor, that is negligent because a minor cannot legally own and obtain a firearm.
Okay, I'd like to provide to you and get your input based off the definition from Legal Dictionary. Quote, the failure to exercise a degree of care or caution necessary to protect others from harm. So from that, what degree in this legislation, in this language, are we expecting to hold adults? And what do you believe is fair when it comes to that definition?
Could you repeat the question one more time, just to give more clarification what you're asking specifically?
Yes. So the definition I provided from Legal Dictionary was the failure to exercise a degree of care or caution necessary to protect others from harm. And so with that, I understand the need to make sure that parents are held to a degree of liability, but what, I guess, degree is too much and unfair to parents when it comes to them being punished with a Category B felony, which could end them 1 to 20 years in prison?
So, Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record, to answer about why Category B felony can be appropriate, a Category B felony, again, has the widest range in sentencing guidelines to give the decision makers opportunity to make their sentencing decisions based on the merits of each case. And in any case regarding a parent or legal guardian's negligence with their minor, they can be charged. For instance, if one were to leave a baby in their charge unattended in a bathtub and that child drowns, they can still be held criminally liable. This logic applies to parents or legal guardians who negligently allow access to their legally owned firearms and their minor misuses it, and it results in in their own death or injury. The adult can be charged under this BDR. What happens past the crime happening is discretion for the prosecutors, for the state, and the courts. Thank you.
Thank you, Legislator Walsh. Youth Legislator McCarthy.
Youth Legislator McCarthy for the record. I have 2 questions. One should be super quick. The first, if the gun is locked up by the parent, does that negligence claim go away? Because currently Nevada law calls it negligence if the gun is unlocked and there is someone younger than 18 years in the house, but if it is locked up, it is no longer negligent. Is that correct?
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record. Currently, NRS 41.472 states that the parent permits access to the firearm. So if the minor can easily access the firearm, then yes, they can be charged under this BDR.
Okay, sorry. Second question, you use words like discretion of the courts, and I just want to ask, to your knowledge, are all parents who have a child die from negligence, such as in the hot car, prosecuted? If not, are there concerns of racial or financial bias affecting when prosecution occurs of negligence in those cases? can that be avoided?
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record, that depends on every case. There is merits to different cases. The point of this measure is to make it possible to prosecute and to have criminal liability. Like I said, currently, my mom is a legal firearm owner. If I were to take her firearm and shoot you right now, she would not be held liable because I don't have a propensity to commit violence. I've never been convicted of a criminal offense, and she didn't know that I was going to use it for unlawful purposes. Even if she did, she could only be sued. Thank you.
Thank you, Youth Legislator Walsh. Any questions at this time? Youth Legislator Upsgarden.
Youth Legislator Upsgarden, for the record. So your bill says that, and what we've been talking about for the last little bit, is that if the firearm is unlocked, then it is negligent, and if it's locked, then it's not. So essentially, is there anything in the bill that would allow parents to not just say, oh, it was locked up and the child just got into it? Like, how would you essentially be able to prove that they were negligent to be able to enforce what the BDR contains?
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record, again, that is discretion of prosecutors. Like I said, current NRS 41.472 states that for this law to apply, that the parent would have to permit access to the firearm. If prosecutors in this situation fully believe that the parent negligently left the firearm available to their minor, then yes, they could be charged under this BDR. It depends on every case, and it's up to the courts. Thank you.
Thank you. Youth Legislator Kane.
Youth Legislator Kane, for the record. So when you're talking about prosecuting the parents of children who have accessed their parents' like firearm negligently and then shoot and kill themselves by suicide, I assume that like in the legislature, you might get a lot of opposition because that's pretty extreme language, like persecuting a parent after their own child's suicide, putting them in prison for up to 20 years. How would you navigate like the opposition to the bill in the legislature?
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record. So yes, this BDR would affect minors who do injure themselves. A parent or legal guardian has to be negligent in their ownership of their firearm, meaning the child has easy access to it for the parent or legal guardian to be held liable. If a minor were to injure themselves with their parent or guardian's legally owned firearm, this applies. Again, if prosecutors in this situation do not believe that there's enough to prove, then the case wouldn't be taken further. However, like I said in my testimony, most of these shootings are mostly unintentional. So a 2-year-old has no intention to purposely kill himself, but he was able to access his parents' firearm and kill himself. So thank you. If that answers your question.
Youth Legislator Chang. Chang or Chong?
Chang.
Chang. Go ahead, Youth Legislator Chang.
Youth Legislator Chang, for the record. So 2 parts to this question. So first, as you mentioned, we have a lot of gun owners in this state. How would you respond to criticism or pushback from them that says, oh, we're responsible gun owners, this is unfairly targeting us? And 2, how do you believe that this bill has a chance to make it through the legislature to get passed into law?
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record. To answer your first question, this measure is about protecting Nevada's youth by holding parents, legal guardians, and those legally responsible for a minor accountable when said minor is able to access that adult's legally owned firearm due to parental negligence. So it would not be targeting responsible gun owners because their minor would not be able to access the firearm because they were not negligent and they properly took care of that firearm. And to answer your second question, this is about protecting Nevada youth. And the first thing that we need to know, firearms are ending up in the hands of children. Minors cannot legally own and obtain a firearm in the state of Nevada. However, it is happening. To answer your question specifically about if I believe it would pass, I can't answer that. But what I do know is that the youth legislators that are sitting before me and in the North have the ability to take this bill as far as it can be and to protect our classmates, to protect our friends, to protect our siblings and everyone else in Nevada. We were representing over 750,000 youth in Nevada, and almost every single one of them could probably name somebody that they know has been affected by this. So thank you. That answers your question.
Thank you. Youth Legislator Nguyen.
Youth Legislator Nguyen, for the record. How will the state ensure that all gun owners are adequately informed about this law, particularly those who may not follow legislative updates closely.
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record. Unfortunately, it shouldn't take a law to make someone want to be a responsible firearm owner. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. To answer your question about people who might be uninformed, they're firearm owners. In the first place, they should know. And if they don't know and something happens, then it's right there. It's in the language. Like I said, it's negligent actions. These are not people who, you can't be just simply innocently careless with a firearm. It's a firearm. These are negligent actions that are leading to the deaths of minors in Nevada. So thank you, if that answers your question.
Thank you. And I believe we have a minute left. Is that what that timer means? Okay. I did have one question for you. And I understand that prosecutors' intent and discretion is important in the case, but under this law, if a parent, just for clarification purposes, if a parent properly and securely stored a firearm and say, obviously we're thinking about more devious minds, so say a 17-year-old, someone who is still technically a minor under the law, happened to overhear a private conversation between parents or something of that nature, heard a passcode to a safe or something of that nature, not would, but could those parents or that parent be held liable in that situation?
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record, again, discretion of prosecutors. However, in NRS 41.472, does state the parent has to allow access. It has to permit access of the firearm. In theory, if a parent were to stow away the firearm, keep it safe, it wouldn't be accessed. But in the rare cases that it is through that minor's willful misconduct, then that can be decided by prosecutors. Not all cases apply in this BDR. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We're going to find Legislator Walsh. All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Legislator Walsh. Next, we have witnesses who have generously come to testify regarding this BDR proposal. Would the witnesses who are ready to testify on BDR 6 please make their way up to the witness table? Thank you both for coming today. Whenever you are ready, please state and spell your name for the record, explain whom you are representing today, and begin your testimony when ready. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Michael Watson on behalf of the Clark County District Attorney's Office. I'm in the Juvenile Division. Thank you for having me here today. This bill I welcome in the fact that I do believe parents need to be held more accountable in these situations. That's actually a common theme with many of our cases, is a lack of parenting and parenting accountability. So I think that is a welcome avenue that we need to pursue. I do see the language of the bill at this time a little bit broad, and it may need to be more narrowly tailored. Just from the perspective of our prosecutor, when I look at a case where it involves a suicide, a child dying within their own home, a sibling dying within their own home, that is something that when I look at that case, it may not be something that we would charge. When we look at that situation, that family is probably already dealing with the biggest loss that they could sustain, and we realize it may be a action of their own negligence. However, we have to use our discretion as to what would be appropriate as to whether we file a case in that situation or not. I do see the trend that we have seen throughout the country in charging parents in school shooting situations using laws that are existing, such as involuntary manslaughter or voluntary manslaughter, in those situations. A bill that would tailor this to something along those lines that would make it easier to prosecute parents in those situations would be helpful. And so I do think that as you're looking at this bill, you might want to look at just tailoring it more narrowly. And also just another issue that we would come across in a bill like this in determining the negligence and determining whether a firearm was accessible or not. Oftentimes our only witness to that is going to be the parent. And so it may prove difficult in proving that portion of any crime against a parent, just trying to show that they actually did willfully allow this child to have the gun in any manner when oftentimes we're only going to have their testimony that I did have it locked up. I don't know how he got to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John Piro from the Clark County Public Defender's Office. I want to thank y'all first for having us here again. The other thing I want to do is thank y'all for taking on such a weighty issue. I think y'all have to deal with issues that we did not have to deal with as kids in school. We watch the news all the time and we see school shootings, and you see that youth suicides are up, and it's problematic. And it's problematic across the whole nation. And when we were kids, that wasn't one of our concerns when we went to school. So I thank you for not just throwing your hands up and saying there's nothing that can be done about this problem, and actually trying to take action on the issue. There are some things, though, that are concerning that I want to talk to you about, and some of them you actually brought up. The paragraph and sentence that you talk about, this bill would remove the requirement that a parent or guardian had any knowledge of potential misuse, is extremely problematic. It creates a strict liability crime. And so I want to try to paint this in as broad a picture, and I hope I don't make myself sound foolish, but let's talk about you're walking down the hallway in school, you got your brand new Jordans on, and I stomp on those Jordans on purpose, right? I'm liable for that because I did that purposely. But if I just accidentally nick your new Jordans, right? That's not on purpose. I should be treated differently for doing that. So let's say the penalty for me purposely stomping on your Jordans is a punch in the face, right? That's just the penalty, right? Right off the bat. But the penalty for me just narrowly touching them when we're walking through the hallway together is not a punch on the face. What this bill would do would turn it into either situation, whether I intended it or not, mandatory punch in the face. And like my friend from the prosecutor's office said, when a child kills himself, that's probably one of the worst punishments that a parent has to live with for the rest of their lives. And then putting them in prison for 1 to 20 years to tack on that insult to injury, I don't know that that's going to make much of a difference. I brought something about deterrence. I did not bring enough copies, but I brought some that I will leave. But this is from the Department of Justice. This isn't the public defenders. These are the people that make the laws at the top of our nation. And so there was some testimony that came that this law would be punitive and would deter. But what the Department of Justice has said is that the certainty of being caught, meaning that if somebody who's about to commit a crime knows they're going to be caught, they're less likely to do a crime. However, sending them to prison isn't an effective way to deter the crime. Higher sentences are not an effective way to deter the crime. So I think that this bill has good intentions, but its execution of those intentions are not going to accomplish the desired result of reducing these problems. And it's not going to deter it. And as much as both the Nevada legislature as a whole, the adults that make laws, like to think that people watch legislative hearings, they do not. Lobbyists do. People who have to deal with these do. I wish there was a better way, and I wish there was a better way to stop this. There are crimes that we can charge, though. So I would just want to let you know that it's not like this is something that won't be penalized. There are child abuse crimes, so that if a child has access to these things, they can be charged with child abuse. It's not the most easiest case to prove, and it requires a level of prosecutorial discretion to look into that without going on a strict liability angle. The other thing, and I think you brought this up, Youth Legislature Rios, it was like we were mind melding. Prosecutors would then become the sole determiner of who was a responsible gun owner. So if I have my gun locked up and for some reason a youth overhears my password and uses that, then I become liable, then I have to go to prison, even though I've done my best to try to secure that firearm in a responsible way. I don't think that necessarily makes good legislation. So those are our concerns. Perhaps maybe changing this bill into something that is more educational on gun storage, perhaps mandating gun storage options. perhaps doing things like that would be a better way to go with this type of legislation. Although I do really appreciate the aim of trying to do something, and I do really appreciate Youth Legislator Walsh in trying to tackle such a weighty issue. It's not an easy issue. It's not something you should be dealing with all the time or worrying about when you go to school. I don't think this piece of legislation is a solution, but I do appreciate y'all trying to tackle this issue. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do any youth legislators have questions for the witnesses?
This is the
In the north?
Youth Legislator Allen. My question is for Mr. Perro, and I think you kind of hit it a little bit, but just to be clear for everybody, do you feel that in the last line of the language that was sent to us, when it states that, quote, of this law, category B, felony punishable by 1 to 20 years in prison, do we feel that that is a bit extreme when it comes to the degree in which we can hold parents liable for their quote unquote negligent actions?
John Pirro for the record. Youth Legislator Allen, you are hitting the nail on the head in the sense that there are very few strict liability crimes on the books for a reason, because when somebody does something on purpose, they should be treated differently than somebody who is not doing something on purpose. And we have a whole felony scheme from category A, B, C, D, and E, with B being the second most extreme penalty. So I'm always cautious when we're enacting laws in the category B section of our statutory code without evidence-based reasons to do so. Like, I always want to see, when we're making a new law, I want to see an evidence-based reason, like if we do this, it actually is going to directly cause a reduction in these type of things, not just a correlation, but cause a reduction. And so I am concerned about this being a category B felony punishable by 1 to 20 years in prison. And I do think, as my colleague from the DA's office said, what if that's a single father who has 2 children and the unthinkable happens? And then we're going to put that father in prison, and then what do we do with the child? Do we put him in foster care? There's things that we got to think about, ramifications downstream, that it's hard to do with a piece of legislation.
Thank you. I appreciate your insight.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time? Youth Legislator McCarthy?
Youth Legislator McCarthy, for the record, I feel that you both have addressed this to some extent, but I guess I would just like some clarification. Do you worry that circumstances can be a defining factor leading to you use this phrase, prosecutional discretion, making the law unfair? Because a negligent parent whose child decides to shoot up a school, both negligent parents committed the exact same actions, but the prosecution may view one as a more, the suicide might be, for example, they decide not to go through with prosecuting and the school shooting because other families were affected. They choose to go through with it, and in a sense, that's creating unfair circumstances.
I mean, Michael Watson for the record. I certainly think that will be a factor. That will be a factor in any prosecutor's decision making as to whether to charge a crime or not. I think, just to give an example, it's already a factor in some instances already. When you have a victim that's, say, a large retail store, it's less likely that a case is going to be filed in that situation for stealing versus someone's home. So I think we already kind of make those decisions on a lot of cases already. And yes, certainly there will be a amount of pressure that would exist in a school shooting case, and a desire to take on that prosecution as well, that would not exist in a suicide type situation.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time? Anyone in the South? Youth Legislator Park.
So when it comes to this law, do you think changing it from like a civil liability to a criminal liability even like could increase deterrent at all? Or do you think that like for the like general population, people who aren't well versed in law tend to view them like they don't really view it much of a difference between those two?
John Pirro for the record. So the National Institute of Justice says that when you increase like a penalty or add a criminal penalty, it's not necessarily going to increase deterrence. And I guess I could ask you, right? Did you know that a parent, before getting into all this, did you know that a parent could be charged with child abuse for a situation like this already? Right. So like we don't always know what is already on the book. So it's not necessarily a deterrent to say like, oh, well, we created this new law and it will stop this action, because a lot of people don't even know what the law is. Like we hope that we know basic human decency, but it's hard to know all the laws on the books. As a lawyer, I can tell you it's hard to know all the laws on the books.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time from the South? From the North? All right, seeing none, I'd like to thank our witnesses again for their time and testimony today. All right, Youth Legislator Walsh, please, if you can, make a final statement regarding your proposed BDR before we proceed. Please continue whenever you're ready.
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record. Before I get into the meat of my closing statements, I would like to remind everybody that today you can actually do something. You can take actionable steps to help prevent gun violence. The language might not be exactly what you want or exactly what everyone wants. That's why it's the entire Youth Legislature's initiative. That's why everyone is selecting a BDR, not one person coming up with one idea. If there's one thing I've learned over the past year and a half, is that I'm sitting before fabulous young forward thinkers, change makers who want to make Nevada a better, happier, and safer place. I know that you're sitting there and you're thinking, I don't want this to happen, but I don't know what to do. And I'm sitting in front of you saying, I have an idea. I have something to say. I have something to tell you. And then you can say back to me, we know what to do. We got it. We're going to help our fellow friends. But I'd also like to remind you of a situation you know far too well. It's the first day of school. You're looking around in your new classrooms with your new teachers and your new classmates. I know you look around and you spot that large cabinet or that nook behind the door or the teacher's desk that you can hide under. I know you often think about, what would I do? What would I do if my life was in danger? If a minor brought their parent or legal guardian's firearm, which they accessed through that adult's negligence, onto my school's campus? I know you've had a talk with your family on what to do. We've all sat in our classrooms a couple of times a year, and as we hear someone pretend to knock on the door, urging for our class to allow access, and you don't. It's a lockdown drill. Maybe you haven't been through a lockdown maybe you've been through a lockdown that wasn't a drill. I know I have. Even if you haven't, I know you have thought, what would I do? I remember coming home that day after school in 2019, hugging my mom and saying, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do because I was 12. Because as a minor, you should not wonder what to do in an active shooter scenario, at a party, with your friends, at school. You shouldn't know because it shouldn't be a likely scenario. However, this isn't a reality. The reality we face as young people in this state is that you do have to think about it. BDR 6 is about keeping that thought, what would I do, exactly as it is, a thought. I want what would I do to remain a nightmare scenario. I do not want what would I do to turn into what do I do or what did I do. Accidental shootings with a minor and their parent or legal guardian's firearm, which they accessed through that adult's negligence, is no different. In all of the cases I listed today and meetings prior, which are not all of them I may add, those children had friends, classmates. There are children in Nevada right now who saw their classmate one day and not the next. When they turned to their classmate and thought, I hope I see you tomorrow, their wishes were not answered. Their wishes were not answered because of an adult's negligence, negligence which has been repeated time and time again. Negligence which will be repeated if there are no criminal consequences. Negligence which will be repeated if the law does not change. As stated earlier, BDR 6 plans to revise NRS 41.472. I have one question for you. When do you think this law was last updated? Surely it had to be after the school shooting in Columbine in 1999 that exposed the horrors of an adult's negligence with a firearm and their minor. Well, if not that, then after the school shooting in Sparks in 2013, which proved to Nevada that we are no different. If not that, maybe it was after Johns Hopkins University released the terrifying statistic that the leading cause of death among children and teens in Nevada was firearms for the 4th year running in 2022, with a staggering 18 children being killed by firearms in 2022 alone. Surely this NRS had to have been updated sometime after this. No, NRS 41.472 has not been updated since 1995. 1995. That is almost 30 years ago. Not a single person on this youth legislature was alive when this law was last updated. Not a single person on the Nevada state legislature was in office when this NRS was last updated. However, we are living proof of its consequences. It has been almost 30 years. We cannot wait another 30. My fellow youth legislators, you have the key right now to keep that, what would I do, as a thought, for it not to turn into, what do I do? You have the opportunity to change that, I hope I see you tomorrow, into, I will see you tomorrow. Every single one of you applied to the Nevada Youth Legislature to be the change, to change the future, and to serve Nevada's youth. Be the change. Let's keep our friends and families safe. We are not a state that sits back and lets things play out. We are a state born out of remarkable circumstances. You are all change makers, forward thinkers, and friends of your community. Let's do this. People call this generation impatient. It's been 30 years since NRS 41.472 was last updated. I think we've been patient long enough. The time is up. Vote BDR 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Youth Legislator Walsh. Before we continue, do any youth legislators have additional questions or comments regarding this BDR proposal? Youth Legislator Chen, go ahead.
Hi, Youth Legislator Chen for the record. I just wanted to end with the question thinking towards the future. How comfortable are you about changing the language, and how open are you to changing, like, how much of the language are you willing to change? Sorry, can I continue? Okay. Given the witness's advice that it is a very broad, the language is very broad, and category B can also be too broad.
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record. As I stated earlier in my closing statements, I would be open to it because, like I said, I know I'm sitting in front of forward-thinking young people who, we all know the phrase, 2 minds are better than 1. It's just me up here, but there are 20 other of you that can help, and we can make this bill into something that can really make change. And I just wanted to thank the 2 witnesses that were here today and took time out of their day to give their expert testimonies. I appreciate that as well. The BDR is to protect Nevada's youth. If that goal, that heart, that reason to help your friends, to help your classmates, and to help your siblings remains the same, like I said, I'm in a group. This is a legislature, not one person. We all have our own great ideas and our own experiences and our own values. And if the youth legislature selects this bill and decides the language needs to be changed, the language needs to be changed. It's the thought of the entire youth legislatures, not just mine. Hopefully that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's time. So we're going to go ahead. Oh, right. I thought that was the timer. Do any of the youth legislators have questions at this time or comments about this BDR proposal? None in the north, none in the south. All right, we're going to go ahead and continue on. Thank you, Legislator Walsh. And thank you to both of you, Youth Legislator McCarthy and Youth Legislator Walsh, for your presentations and closing statements today. We will now move on to the selection of the BDR that we will present to the 2025 legislature. Before we select our BDR, does anyone have remaining questions or comments regarding either of the proposals? Seeing none, we will now take a vote on the 2 BDR proposals. When the secretary calls your name, please indicate whether you would like to vote for BDR 3 or BDR 6. And if the secretary could please call the roll.
Youth Legislator Allen,
BDR 3.
Youth Legislator Kane,
BDR 3.
Youth Legislator Chang,
BDR 6.
Youth Legislator Chen,
BDR 3.
Youth Legislator Chong,
BDR 3.
Youth Legislator Cohen,
BDR 3.
Youth Legislator Conyers,
BDR 3.
Youth Legislator Coughlin,
BDR 3.
Youth Legislator McCarthy,
BDR 3.
Youth Legislator Wen,
BDR 3.
Youth Legislator Obstgarden,
BDR 3.
Youth Legislator Park,
BDR 3.
Chair Rios,
BDR 3.
Youth Legislator Rosas,
BDR 3.
Youth Legislator Villatoro,
Absent.
Youth Legislator Walsh,
BDR 6.
Youth Legislator Wolf.
BDR 3.
We could tally those up.
The BDR selected by the Nevada Youth Legislature is BDR 3.
All right, thank you. The Nevada Youth Legislature has selected BDR number 3. Thank you for everyone for sharing your comments and questions regarding both of these BDRs. I would especially like to thank all the witnesses who took the time to be here today. Your participation was very important and helpful in the selection process. In case the legal division has any questions that need to be answered in the drafting process of the BDR, I'm going to designate Youth Legislator McCarthy as the contact person to answer those questions. I will now turn the meeting over to Senator Wiener for an explanation of Agenda Item 7, recommendations for enhancements to the NYL bill to be introduced in the 2025 legislative session.
Thank you, Chair Rios. I appreciate the opportunity. We're doing something new that we have not done in the history of the program. And this is exciting because you heard both of the presenters of the proposals that you just voted on mention that this is the bill of the Nevada Youth Legislature. And we often have said that, but the momentum was driven by the proponent, the major proponent who brought the bill idea to you for consideration. What we're doing again for the first time is engaging the entire youth legislature to have a voice in. As you ask questions, you already indicated some of your interests and concerns. This is your opportunity to offer a recommendation for something to be included or addressed in the BDR that will go to the 2025 legislative session. Our intention behind this is indeed to have the entire youth legislature embrace this proposal as the NYL bill, because you have a voice now to offer suggestions. So we will entertain 7 recommendations that would be included in the measure you just passed as your BDR. You will have someone who will speak for it, given the opportunity to support it, one colleague, one can oppose it, then we'll move on to the next suggestion. At the end of that, we will vote on each recommendation that has been offered one at a time, and we can include up to 7 recommendations in the language for the final draft that the legal division will create. So this is your time to take full ownership as the NYL of the proposal that will be going into the 2025 legislative session. So, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wiener. At this time, I will accept one recommendation at a time, followed by one comment of support and one comment of opposition. Again, these are 7 recommendations. Let's go ahead and get started. So do any youth legislators have any recommendations for BDR 3 to recommend at this time?
Youth Legislator Chong, for the record.
Go ahead.
I would recommend that BDR 3, I know there are some changes. It would require staff members of a school to report to the administrator or whatever. It would include drug, alcohol, and tobacco use. So that's adding alcohol to the kind of drugs that are included in the bill.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak in support of the recommendation?
Youth Legislator Chang for the record.
Go ahead.
I understand that there may have been reasons not to include alcohol within this BDR. However, alcohol use is a non-negligible part of addiction. It affects thousands of people across Nevada. In the same CDC report that Youth Legislator McCarthy mentioned, it mentions that almost an entire percent of those under 18 are using alcohol as they're binge drinking alcohol. And so that represents a significant problem that I believe should be addressed in the same breath as tobacco use, as drug use, because they ultimately have the same effect. They ruin lives. They make people's lives worse.
Thank you. Are there any youth legislators who would like to speak in opposition to this recommendation? Youth Legislator McCarthy.
Sorry, can I ask a clarifying question? Two, maybe. Are these recommendations 100% going to be adopted, or the legal department will work with them?
This is the NYL proposal. So in the procedure that we are adopting today, each one of these are being considered pro and con. At the end of the 7 or up to 7, there may not be 7, then the chair will have a vote one at a time as to which ones will be included. That will be the part of the NYL proposal.
Yes, and then I guess are we allowed to clarify? I don't really want to speak in opposition of this because I have considered alcohol multiple times, but there is one thing I want to bring up for youth legislators to consider that could be seen as opposition. I only mentioned the existing jurisdiction of the school to prison pipeline to not report drug use on school campuses. I have no idea if the same jurisdiction exists for alcohol, so it is possible that including alcohol would mean that law enforcement would have to get involved. I do not know. I do not know that information. So if it were to say that that pipeline, the jurisdiction does not exist to ignore or circumnavigate law enforcement, if alcohol is included, I believe it could be a detriment to the bill overall. But if the same pipeline exists, I think that alcohol is a very good addition to make.
Okay, let me add some clarification here after a few years in the legislature. You and in this program, you will have another opportunity as the body, the full body, to consider the final language in January. The attorneys, Mr. Noss, who's been extraordinarily committed to the program and been available to both the finalists in answering questions. Mr. Noss is paying attention as we proceed today. And if there's anything that needs to be clarified, we could still have the opportunity to address anything that needs to be finalized or made clear to the NYL. You still have a final opportunity to approve or clean up or clarify language when the bill is considered in draft form at the January meeting.
Thank you. And then Youth Legislator Walsh, you want to speak in opposition?
Yes, Youth Legislator Walsh for the record. I'm not in opposition that alcohol isn't an addiction. However, we have to remind ourselves of teachers in this situation. Teachers already have annual trainings every year on so many things, including child abuse, all of this stuff. Every single year, it's always there. And we're already adding training for symptoms of drug and tobacco use. We already talked about the possibility that a teacher might see someone with a concussion and then get that confused with drugs, stuff like that. Adding alcohol might add another layer of that, and now we have more students that might be investigated when they're not showing signs of this. It might bog down teachers as well. So I just wanted to point that out in this consideration.
Thank you. All right, we're going to look for the second recommendation. Is there any youth legislators that would like to provide recommendation 2 for this BDR 3? Youth Legislator Opsgarden.
Youth Legislator Opsgarden for the record. So this may have been mentioned earlier. It's been a couple hours. Don't have perfect notes, but I would recommend just removing the last sentence. Reports will also be made available to the legislature with the pupil's personal information redacted, because I just personally don't see the inherent value of giving that to the legislature, because it might also provide conflict. Like, what if the personal information is still there, and things that would essentially be a burden to the intended goal of the bill.
All right. Would anyone like to speak in opposition? Youth Legislator McCarthy.
Youth Legislator McCarthy, for the record. That last sentence was put there so that these reports could be made as not entirely publishable data, but data for the legislature, similar to the way that in my speech, as well as Youth Legislator Walsh's speech, we use statistics to help convince you of the importance of our issue. I wouldn't necessarily, again, I didn't draft this, legal did. I wouldn't necessarily, the intent of that is the reports, numbers of reports. So how many reports occurred at each school could be offered without any identifying information or maybe what happened, but the number of how often they occurred so that the legislature could see, oh, there have been 100 reports in the past school year. Maybe we need to open more drug resource centers or invest in the output of this bill, because this is kind of the input to get them into resources, get them to resources, and maybe it could help to increase funding for resources. So just wanted to put that out there.
All right. Thank you. All right. Would anyone like to propose a third amendment? Youth Legislator Walsh.
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record, I would like to propose a recommendation to remove for a follow-up meeting with the people. Youth Legislator Nguyen and others had mentioned that this part of the bill draft request might lead to it being used as harassment or a form of punishment to the student. And again, even adding further, once the school offers in this scenario, offers resources to the family, to the parents, it's out of the school's hands. Again, the schools are academic institutions. Yes, they are networks of many, many people who want to serve Nevada youth, who want to help children. Again, it could bog down the real point of a school. And again, removing this could possibly help prevent this being used as harassment and targeting specific students as punishment. So, thank you.
Thank you, Legislator Walsh. Would anyone like to speak in support of the recommendation?
Youth Legislator Allen, for the record, just quickly, I appreciate Youth Legislator Walsh making those comments and those further suggestions. And overall, I do feel that once the school has stepped in, and to the point where we are at 3 resources given to the family in language, I think that at that point, we're kind of, it's on the burden of the parents and the student to take further action and to utilize those resources. At what point does 4 become unnecessary? And again, like she mentioned, a point of abuse and a point of opportunity for administrators to then, quote, punish these students, which is not the intention of the bill and of the language. So I definitely want us to consider that the burden of rehabilitation is on these students and their families.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak in opposition? Youth Legislator Park.
Youth Legislator Park, for the record, not in complete opposition to the idea, but I do want you to consider those parents or those kids with parents that aren't really too involved in these kids' lives. A lot of drug issues, when you look at drug abuse statistics, especially among adolescents, a lot of it boils down to familial issues, whether it's environmental issues at home or simply just parental neglect. And if we're only sort of promoting schools to only have to worry about giving it to the parent and only having to give them like a couple resources and then ending it there, it might not do much for the child in the future. Although it is important to consider that it might be abused between certain social, economic, and just demographics that are more prone to be abused during these specific situations. But I do want you to consider that just having resources, just promoting resources might not be effective enough, especially when those at risk tend to be those whose parents actively don't care already.
All right. Thank you. We're going to move on to the 4th recommendation. Youth Legislator Chen.
Youth Legislator Chen, for the record. And I was wondering if the body thinks it would be feasible to include counselors and trusted adults into the language rather than just administrators, parents, and guardians, because I do understand, to my knowledge, especially with my school, the counselors are very close to the students, and some come off the top of my head, and they could definitely be resources that the student has that may replace a follow-up meeting with the pupil if that recommendation is deferred, if that makes sense.
So just to clarify, you're speaking on section 1 instead of the administrator notify the parent guardian the pupil and schedule a meeting. You would include counselors. All right, Perfect. Thank you. Would anyone like to speak in support? Youth Legislator Cohen.
Vice Chair Cohen for the record. I do think that having an additional adult in the room in the conversation would be beneficial to the youth at risk in the situation. And I think even if we keep the language that says the administrator notifies, I think you can also say upon the request of the student or parent or guardian that there could be another trusted adult like a staff or faculty member at the school present in that conversation. I think that would just help facilitate things smoother, and I think that would be more beneficial just overall.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak in opposition?
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record. Counselors are academic counselors at the end of the day. They have mental health training, but I get the point of wanting to have another trusted adult in the room. However, counselors might not be the best one for that. I go to a school with over 4,000 students and like maybe 5 or 6 counselors. That's hundreds of students for one person. That's getting schedules together. And you only meet them about once a year to go over your academic plan. They have to deal with suicide watches. If a student does that, there's also 504 meetings. Counselors do honestly so much more than their job description. So adding them to this conversation, while I can see what might be good, it might be good for smaller schools. However, we need to look at the bigger picture with schools that have 4,000 plus students and understaffed. Counselors are already understaffed anyways, along with teachers. So having another person in that conversation, and Youth Legislator McCarthy mentioned it as well, if the drug statistics are really as bad as that we learned today, that's a lot of burden on people who already do way more than their job description. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to recommendation 5. If possible, I would like to recommend something for recommendation 5. And so this goes based off of what the interim superintendent was describing to us and possible fears of scaring youth if they're entering a meeting with multiple adults. I would recommend that instead of option 1 that we currently have on there, the administrator notify the parent or guardian of the pupil and schedule a meeting with the parent or guardian. We utilize what the interim superintendent recommended with evidence-based substance abuse screening and replace that section 1 with something of this nature. The administrator asks the parent or guardian of the pupil for consent to complete an evidence-based substance abuse screening and leave the other segments intact, but utilize that as the avenue for identification, so on and so forth, and everything else in the bill to remain. Would anyone like to speak in support of the recommendation?
Youth Legislator Allen, for the record, I was actually going to come and give a similar suggestion for the language surrounding that, so I appreciate Chair Rios for that suggestion. I definitely agree that that would definitely help to rewrite section 1 of the language, and then definitely we would provide greater opportunities for mass students to be recognized, but then also not to be put in front of a whole room of people and kind of them being on the line. It definitely also helps it to be a safer environment, and then it also overall helps to combat greater issues as it starts as mental health screening and then kind of narrows down to drug and then potentially alcohol abuse training too.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak in opposition? Youth Legislator McCarthy.
I believe that using evidence-based solutions is very important, but I do assume strongly that there will be a cost involved with evidence-based screening. She mentioned how it could be similar to the eye tests and hearing tests that you have. In my experience in middle school, the eye tests were administered by machines that probably each cost hundreds or thousands of dollars, and the hearing tests were administered by outside personnel that the school brought in, which includes a cost. So this would be bringing back in additional fiscal impact, and that could affect how the legislature receives the bill.
Thank you for that reflection. All right. Youth Legislator Chang, go ahead.
So I was going to add a suggestion to amend section 2. I wanted to amend it to include that if the student is found to not have taken drugs, then that file created by the school would be erased in order to not have any potential Mars on the record just because of a potential false positive.
All right. Would anyone like to speak in support of the recommendation? Would anyone like to? Yes, Youth Legislator Walsh.
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record. This would be a good recommendation because, like we talked about earlier, we don't want this BDR to turn into something punishable, or we're now reaching students that shouldn't be reached. We want to focus on students that are substance abusers. We don't want to get into all of that with people who may have, may not, but then if they're proved to not be abusing substances, then that shouldn't reflect on their record because it wasn't their fault that they were suspected of drug use, and now they have to go through the steps to get that off their record. If they want to go and to apply for college, for example, and then there's this like ominous meeting with all of these very important people that might be like alarms for when they want to apply for a job, all of this stuff. So it would be important that the file were to only happen if the student actually was suspected of drug use and if they weren't. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak in opposition to the recommendation? Youth Legislator Obstgarten.
So the Youth Legislator Obstgarten for the record. So essentially the language right now has the report filed with the school, and keeping this is actually necessary because say a student was taking drugs, has this meeting, and then argues their way out of it, and then continues taking drugs. If the report is there, not necessarily on their record, but there in the school's files, and these symptoms keep coming up, having this there as essentially a lineage of they experienced these symptoms in October and December and February and April, it can be used to either identify a larger mental health problem or identify the fact that they were in fact using drugs.
Thank you. Would anyone like to provide the seventh recommendation? Youth Legislator Cohen.
Vice Chair Cohen for the record. I just want to reference the last sentence of the BDR about the reports. I think that not only that they should be made available, but I think we need to revise it where the schools are tracking all of the reports that are made to them by the teachers so that at the end of the school year and looking year over year, we can see how statistics have either gotten better or gotten worse. And we can see actually how this bill has translated into tangible results. And without any actual like hard stats, we won't have any idea if this bill is working. So I think if we mandate stat tracking and stat reporting, that'll be a valuable addition to the bill.
Thank you for the recommendation. Anyone to speak in support? Youth Legislator McCarthy.
I agree that this would be a good addition because if the statistics are available, then it is also possible that someone like a future youth legislator could use them in their own testimonies if they are talking about expanding drug resources or other drug legislation. And if the numbers are only available here were the numbers each year, it might not be released each year, and there may not be a way to make it into tangible statistics unless the schools are tracking it.
Would anyone like to speak in opposition? Youth Legislator Walsh.
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record. I feel like we've already covered this with the part where it says that the reports will be made available to the legislature. Mandating it for schools seems highly unnecessary. Again, schools are the places where you go to see your friends and go to your history class. There's only so much that a school can do. Making it stat tracking can, again, bog down teachers and staff. And now suddenly the point of the BDR has gone from wanting to help students to wanting to figure out stats. Again, we're serving the youth of Nevada. The point of this BDR is to help and intervene, not to have our own conveniency with statistics. And again, it's not like it isn't in the BDR. The language says that reports can be made available to the legislature without the people's personal information. So it's not as if that we're in the dark here. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that ends our discussion on recommendations. We will now vote regarding each of the recommendations. Ms. McManus, would you please summarize the recommendation proposed by each youth legislator?
Youth Legislator Chong recommended to add alcohol to the bill. Recommendation number 2 was from Youth Legislator Obstgarten, which was to remove reports submitted to the legislature. Recommendation number 3 was from Youth Legislator Walsh to remove the follow-up meeting with the pupil, which was...
Ms. McManus?
Yes.
Ms. McManus, we're doing one at a time, so we just need to hear the first one, please.
Oh, I apologize. The first recommendation was from Youth Legislator Chong, and that was to add alcohol to the bill.
All right. Thank you, Ms. McManus. I will now accept a motion to incorporate this recommendation into the NYL bill. Would any youth legislator like to make a motion?
I motion to incorporate this suggestion into the language of BDR 3.
Youth Legislator Allen has made a motion to incorporate Youth Legislator Chong's recommendation to the NYL bill. Is there a second to the motion?
I second this motion.
Legislator Conyers has seconded the motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Youth Legislator Chen.
Youth Legislator Chen for the record. Seeing that this is I don't want to say extensive in a negative light. It's extensive in a good light. It's more than just a simple solution. It's a stack solution that we're providing for students. Could we kind of just question that? Could including alcohol abuse now be a little bit too early, as it is just not as prevalent as drug and e-cigarette use within schools, and it may be just easier to have that reporting for drugs from the start, and then we can work after.
Thank you. I believe we go ahead and take a vote on the motion. All those in favor of the motion to incorporate Youth Legislator Chong's recommendation into the NYL bill, please signify by saying yes. Yes?
Yes.
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 All those opposed, please signify by saying no.
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 If those who said no can please identify themselves for the record, one at a time.
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record.
Youth Legislator Nguyen for the record.
Youth Legislator McCarthy for the record.
Youth Legislator Park for the record.
Youth Legislator Opsgarten for the record.
Youth Legislator Chen for the record.
Youth Legislator Kane for the record.
Youth Legislator Coughlin for the record.
All right, I believe we have a majority. Is that correct?
I believe Mr. Chair Rios. How many people have in attendance today? Is it 17? To our secretary.
I believe it's 16.
Yeah, if I wasn't clear if Youth Legislator Viatora was there. It sounded like she was, but may have stepped
No.
out. Okay,
No.
then it is 16.
16, and that was 8. And a tie is a defeat.
All right, that motion 1 from Youth Legislator Chong has failed. We're going to move on to motion 2 from Youth Legislator Opsgarden. Can the secretary please summarize recommendation 2?
Recommendation 2 from Youth Legislator Opsgarden was to remove the reports to the legislature in section 4.
All right, thank you. I will now accept a motion to incorporate this recommendation into the NYL bill. Would anyone like to make a motion at this time?
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record. I'd like to make a motion to incorporate this suggestion into the bill.
Thank you. Youth Legislator Walsh, would anyone like to second the motion?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Youth Legislator Kane. Is there any discussion on the motion? Youth Legislator Opsgarden.
Youth Legislator Opsgarten for the record. I would just like to clarify that based on what Youth Legislator, I believe it was McCarthy, had said regarding this proposal at the time, I will essentially not be voting in favor of this because I was not aware of essentially the impact that it had on the bill itself.
Thank you, Legislator Opsgarden. I'll now take a vote on the motion. All those in favor of the motion to incorporate Youth Legislator Opsgarden's addition into the NYL bill, please signify by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please signify by saying no.
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 No. All right. I believe that's
For clarification, Chair, was that Youth Legislator Allen in the north who said yes?
Yes, that's correct. Youth Legislator Allen,
Thank
for the
you.
record.
I think in this regard, since we had one yes and with the remaining members of the body, we could indicate for the record the one singular yes for supporting it.
all right. Thank you. And so recommendation 2 will not pass. Move on to recommendation 3. Could the secretary please?
Youth Legislator Chung, for the record,
Summary.
there were two
Yes.
there were 2 votes in the north. I and Youth Legislator Allen.
Thank you. I choose Legislator Chung and Allen then with yeses. Thank you for that clarification. All right, we're going to move on to recommendation 3. Could the secretary please summarize recommendation 3?
Recommendation 3 from Youth Legislator Walsh was to remove a follow-up meeting with the pupil in section 4.
Thank you. We're now going to, will now accept a motion to move forward with recommendation 3. Would anyone like to make a motion at this time?
Youth Legislator Kane, for the record, I move that we adopt this amendment to the proposal.
Thank you, Legislator Kane. Would anyone like to second the motion?
Second.
Who was that? I'm sorry.
Youth Legislator Allen, for the record.
Thank you. Legislator Allen has seconded the motion. I'll now take a vote on the motion. All those in favor of the motion to... Thank you. Is there any discussion on the motion? Youth Legislator Walsh.
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record, this should be adopted, one, because we want to prevent further harassment in this BDR being used for something we don't want to happen, which is harassment, using it as a punishment. 2, again, we want to intervene, we want to help students, but a follow-up meeting is highly unnecessary given that there are 3 other steps within the BDR. And again, schools are academic institutions. We want to help students, but again, they're academic institutions. A follow-up meeting would just bog down teachers' time, administrators' time, and now you have to basically embarrass the pupil again, because again, having that meeting going forward might bring another level of shame now that they have to talk about it, now that their teachers and everyone else in their life knows that they have substance abuse problems. So it would just be very beneficial to remove a follow-up meeting with the pupil after resources were given. Thank you.
Thank you, Legislator Walsh. Legislator Cohen with a comment.
I still think it's important that we keep the meeting in there just because we need to be able to track how the steps being taken in 1, 2, 3 are actually working. And if we can ensure that the pupil is actually following these steps and maybe receiving extra guidance for future, that can have a very, very positive impact on the pupil, especially if the steps 1, 2, and 3 were not enough. Maybe this last step will just push them over the edge where they finally do feel rehabilitated and they do feel like this process that they had to go through was beneficial to them instead of detrimental. So I think this is something that is definitely, the potential benefits far outweigh the potential downsides.
Thank you. Legislator Cohen, any other discussion or comment at this time? Legislator Conyers.
Youth Legislator Chang, for the record, I don't agree with the Third Amendment simply because it's the only way that leads us into if reporting to police if necessary. It's also one of the ways that we can ensure that this bill is actually doing what it wants to do. So moving on to a report to law enforcement may be done if deemed necessary language. The only way to really establish that there's a need for that kind of outside intervention really is a follow-up meeting, by following up with the student, by making sure they're getting the help they need. Without having a follow-up, without ensuring that they have actually gotten benefit out of those resources, it really doesn't seem like there's any point in keeping the report to law enforcement language either. And furthermore, schools are, yes, educational institutions, but they're also institutions meant to benefit the student. And if benefiting the student requires giving them a place to either talk about their grievances or try and find help, then we should give them that audience. And requiring a follow-up meeting ensures that the staff, that the school can make sure that those students are indeed getting the help that we tried to give them in 3.
Thank you, and I believe Youth Legislator Conyers had a comment.
Youth Legislator Conyers for the record, and I am saying this as someone who has a history of drug abuse in my family. The best way to battle addiction is to make sure you are held with as much accountability as possible. And this follow-up meeting is just another way to add accountability to this, which is the best way to battle addiction.
Thank you. Youth Legislator Walsh.
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record. I just wanted to quickly thank Youth Legislator Conyers for sharing that information with us. That is very brave of you. But I do want to note that if a student is taken and they're already being put in front of an administrator, their teacher, possibly other people, including their parents, and being told, we think you're using drugs, and now they have to argue that and say either they are or they admit to it, and then they're given resources, and then they go home with their parent, and now everyone knows they're abusing substances. If you take them out, if you go to that student again in their classroom, take them out, put them in front of an administrator and a teacher, possibly a counselor, maybe their parents again, and say to them, are you still using drugs? It seems like a shame technique, and it could be used abusively, which we do not want to happen. And again, I'm going to say it again. Schools are educational institutions. Yes, we want accountability, but again, these are also minors. We're looking for intervention. We don't want to punish these people. These are our friends. These are our peers. These are our classmates. The last thing we want to do is drag them out further. So yes, thank you.
Thank you, Legislator Walsh. We're going to go ahead and go right to the vote. I'll now take a vote on the motion. All those in favor of the motion to incorporate Youth Legislator Walsh's recommendation into the MYO bill, please signify by saying yes.
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 All opposed, signify by saying no.
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 All right, for the record, I believe it was 3 youth legislators that signified saying no, that signified saying yes. Youth Legislator Walsh, myself, and Youth Legislator Conyers. Is that correct? Was there anyone else who voted yes on the measure?
Youth Legislator Allen, for the record, I also voted yes for the Third Amendment promoted by Youth Legislator Walsh.
All right. Thank you.
Youth Legislator Conyers for the record, I actually didn't vote yes.
You voted no? All right, perfect. I got those voices confused. Okay, so those are the 3 votes that voted yes on the measure, but the measure will not move forward. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to recommendation 4 from Youth Legislator Chen. May the Secretary please provide a summary of the recommendation.
Recommendation number 4 from Youth Legislator Chen was to include counseling personnel in addition to administrators when notifying parents in Section 1.
Thank you, Ms. McManus. I will now accept a motion to incorporate this recommendation into the MYO bill. Would anyone like to make a motion at this time?
Youth Legislator Upsgarten, for the record, I will make the motion.
Youth Legislator Upsgarten has made a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Youth Legislator Wolf has seconded the motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Youth Legislator Walsh.
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record. As I stated previously, counselors are probably one of the most overused positions in terms of everything. They help academically, they help mentally, they have 504 meetings, they have suicide watch meetings. They're constantly always doing something. And for bigger schools like the one I go to, counselors are pretty much overworked. Having a counselor in that room is not as beneficial as it may seem. You've added a third adult that doesn't really need to be there, unless of course they're the one that reported the suspected drug abuse. But in a bigger school, counselors don't see students that very often. They see them a couple times a year, twice, maybe 3 times a year if something happens. The most they'll be able to add is, I know who this student is. That's pretty much it. If a counselor suspects drug abuse is in place, then of course they'd already be at that meeting. But to just unnecessarily drag a counselor out and now you're taking them away from all of their hundreds of other students they need to attend to seems a little extreme. So thank you.
Thank you.
Youth Legislator Allen.
Chen. Excuse me, we're going to go with Youth Legislator Chen, then we're going to go ahead and vote.
Thank you, Youth Legislator Chen, for the record. I do want to emphasize that when I first initially brought the recommendation to the body, I did include counselors and trusted adults and/or trusted adults. because like from personal experience, my math teacher is someone I hold very close to my heart. She's like, I've been in her class for 4 years, whether it's a student aide or a student, and I can go to her for things outside of school needs, and she'd be very willing to help. So, just any adult is something, any trusted adult within the school is something I included to begin with.
Chair Rios, if I
Yes.
may ask for clarification, I just heard and/or. Is the intention a counselor or a trusted adult? Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so then that's or that we're going to go ahead and go with. All right, we're going to go ahead and take the vote for the sake of time. All those in favor of the motion to incorporate Youth Legislator Chen's recommendation into the bill, please signify by saying yes.
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 Yes. All those opposed, please signify by saying no.
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 All right, can the noes please identify themselves for the record?
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record, I said no.
Youth Legislator McCarthy.
Youth Legislator Park.
Youth Legislator Cheng, for the record.
All right, perfect, thank you. And that motion will pass, I believe. Next, we move on to recommendation 5. Can we please have the secretary read a summary of recommendation 5?
Recommendation 5 was from Chair Rios, was to include the recommendation of Deputy Superintendent McGill regarding evidence-based screening to identify drug use.
All right, thank you. Would I like to provide a motion to incorporate this recommendation into the NYL bill?
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record, I have a motion to include this recommendation in the bill.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Youth Legislator Allen, I second the motion.
All right, Youth Legislator Allen will second the motion. We're going to go ahead and if there's any discussion on the motion, Youth Legislator Opsgarden.
Youth Legislator Upscotton, for the record, I just want a quick clarification. Is the recommendation in addition to the terminology already in step 1, or is it a complete replacement of the terminology in step 1?
Originally, the recommendation was a removal of step 1 and a replacement. However, I do understand Youth Legislator McCarthy's concerns over adding price and fiscal note information. And so if possible, I would like to amend the amendment to make it so that it would be in addition to the bill and it wouldn't replace section 1, if that's possible. Senator Wiener, can we amend an amendment proposition?
I think for the details of that, we'd need counsel to help us with the language. It's very comprehensive, and they're both almost standalone, so we'd need Mr. Noss to help us with that language.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Youth Legislator Walsh.
Youth Legislator Walsh, for the record, adding evidence-based screening isn't a problem. However, we're already having the administrator notifying the parent or guardian of the people. That takes a lot of time, by the way. Parents or guardians aren't automatically on their phones all the time. Contacting them can be hard, especially when contact information always isn't available. So that's already hard. 2, a report is filed with the school. Again, also hard. Who's going to do that? And now we have to keep that file. Now we have to have a whole system where we're going to keep that file. 3, resources are given to the family. And as well as a meeting with the parent or guardian. Again, scheduling time with the parent or guardian and the teacher, and possibly now a counselor or a trusted adult, can be very difficult. That's also very hard. And now we're going to have a follow-up meeting with the people. And now you want to add evidence-based screening. It can become a lot for teachers. It can become a lot for the people themselves. Now they're being subjected to multiple things. They're already in a very tough spot in their life. The last thing they need is more fingers pointing at them and making them feel ashamed. And again, fiscal note, we don't have any evidence on how much this would cost yet for us. So it would just be too much to add it right now in this moment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other commentary?
Chair, this is Dave Noss, LCB Legal, for the record.
Yes.
The recommendation stated by the secretary that we are voting on is to add the screener to the list of proposed procedure if there's a child a pupil exhibiting behavior consistent with drug or tobacco use. So that is what we are voting on. If the recommendation stated by the secretary that we are voting on is to add the screener to the list of proposed procedure if there's a child exhibiting behavior consistent with drug or tobacco use. So that is what we are voting on. If the recommendation stated by the secretary that we are voting on is to add the screener to the list of proposed procedure if there's a child exhibiting behavior consistent with drug or tobacco use. the vote is supposed to be removing Section 1 and voting to instead have a screener, that is something else and was not what was stated by the Secretary and not what the motion we are discussing is about.
All right, perfect. Thank you. We can go ahead and move ahead with the Secretary's summary. All right. I'll take a vote now on the motion. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying yes.
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 Yes. All those opposed, please signify by saying no.
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 No. No.
No.
Can the noes please identify themselves for the record?
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record.
Youth Legislator Wynn for the record. Youth Legislator McCarthy for the record.
Youth Legislator Wolf for the record. Youth Legislator Park for the record.
Youth Legislator Chang for the record.
Youth Legislator Coughlin for the record.
That's 7, and so motion passes. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to motion 6 from Youth Legislator Chang. Can we please have the Secretary read a summary of the recommendation?
Recommendation number 6 from Youth Legislator Chang was to include language in Section 2 detailing if a pupil has not taken drugs, the incident would be removed from the record, their record.
Thank you. I'll now have, I'll entertain a motion to vote on the measure. Would any youth legislators like to provide a motion?
Youth Legislator Kane for the record, I motion that we adopt this amendment to our proposal.
Thank you, Legislator Kane. Do we have a second?
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record, I second the motion.
Thank you, Legislator Walsh. Is there any discussion on the motion? Youth Legislator Opsgaard.
So, Youth Legislator Upscutton for the record. So I've already spoken in opposition of this once, and I just want to restate what I've already said before. Having these reports, the current language of the bill doesn't say that it'll go on their personal record, just that there will be a report. And having these reports could be essential to recognizing patterns of students who have frequent false positives, to possibly identifying a larger mental health problem or the fact that they're actually actively using drugs. So we need to keep the current language of the bill and not add this.
All right, any other discussion?
Youth Legislator Chang for the record. So when I first submitted this amendment, the intention was to remove the potential for, say, harassment or the potential for false positives to derail someone's life. When we're talking about issues such as potential drug use, about potentially breaking the law or anything like that, it's important that we make sure that when it's a false accusation, when the accusation isn't actually true, that the person who is accused isn't actually harmed by an accusation that isn't true. And so I understand concerns about keeping a record to make sure there's a pattern to potentially spot if someone is using drugs, but I feel like the point of this whole screening process is to find out conclusively whether or not they are taking drugs. There shouldn't be a double jeopardy. If you found to not have taken drugs, people shouldn't have to put you under scrutiny again and again just because someone thought you were. Again, there are multiple instances where there are potential symptoms of drug usage, and I don't want those potential similar symptoms to impact someone's life.
All right, thank you. And then Youth Legislator McCarthy will be our last comment.
I would just like to reiterate that the report is not leaving the school campus. The report will not be added to the student's permanent record because it does not qualify as a disciplinary action. So a false report should not follow them anywhere after high school or even after the meeting that they discuss the false report with the parent, the teacher, and the administration there.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on to the vote of the motion. All those in favor of the motion to incorporate Youth Legislator Chang's recommendation of the bill, please signify by saying yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. All those opposed?
No.
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 And the noes, please identify themselves for the record.
Youth Legislator
Vice Chair
Allen,
Cohen.
for the record.
Youth Legislator McCarthy for the record.
Youth Legislator Wynn for the record.
Youth Legislator Wolf for the record.
Youth Legislator Park for the record.
Youth Legislator Upskarten for the record.
Youth Legislator Chen.
Youth Legislator Kane.
Youth Legislator Coughlin.
I believe that's a majority no, and so the motion fails. We're going to go ahead and move on to Amendment 7. Can we please have the Secretary read a summary of Amendment 7?
First, we would like to clarify, Vice Chair Cohen, was that your recommendation, or were you speaking or building off of recommendation number 2 by Youth Legislator Opsgarden regarding reports to the legislature?
That was my recommendation. I was just referencing it because it
Okay.
was kind of on the same.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify. So for the record, recommendation number 7 from Vice Chair Cohen would be to require reports be generated by schools to track data annually to determine the efficacy of the bill.
All right, thank you. Can we have a motion on the measure? Anyone would like to motion?
I motion to implement Amendment 7 into BDR 3 language.
Thank you, Youth Legislator Allen. Would anyone like to second the motion?
Youth Legislator Chang for the record. I would like to second this motion.
Thank you, Youth Legislator Chang. Is there any discussion on the motion? Youth Legislator Walsh.
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record. So we just established that we were going to vote to keep the last line about reports will also be made available to the legislature with the people's personal information redacted. This makes the mandating the schools to keep reports slightly redundant since it's all about statistics. The statistics can be provided to the legislature. Also as well, the difference between a school's capability and the legislature's capability is a lot different. A school would have to now create an entire system to keep these reports in order, while the legislature has a lot more resources available to them besides just one public school. So adding it just seems slightly unnecessary, especially when the point is to help students, not just have our own prerogative and hope the bill works. We just want to intervene when a student is suspected of using drugs. Thank you.
Thank you, Legislator Cohen.
Vice Chair Cohen for the record. I just want to talk about the last sentence of the bill. I think it's important that we specify that stats are made available to the legislature just for the purpose of A, figuring out how this bill has actually made a difference so far, and B, using it for future reference, whether expanding it on this bill or creating new bills. And allowing this to happen we'll be able to track just how effective this was actually and use like past mistakes or past successes to shape future policies. And that's only possible if we track stats. And I'm pretty sure schools already have capabilities to track things internally, and I think they already do so. So this wouldn't be something too outlandish or unique to the school.
Chair Rios, if I may ask a question for clarification.
Yes.
I've not heard any reference as to who will be retaining these. Would it be the Department of Education retaining the statistics because that's the policy and procedure entity? Is that where the statistics will be maintained? So
Yeah,
is this
that
a
would-
reporting by schools to DOE?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we could make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Any other discussion at this time? Seeing none, I'll take a vote on the motion. All those in favor of the motion to incorporate Youth Legislator Cohen's recommendation into the MYO bill, please signify by saying yes.
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 Yes. All those opposed, please signify by saying no.
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 Could we have the noes please list their names for the record?
Youth Legislator Walsh for the record.
Youth Legislator Kane for the record.
Youth Legislator Park for the record.
Youth Legislator Upskarten for the record.
All right, I believe motion 7 will pass, and that will bring a close to the recommendation segment. Do we have a list of the past motions?
Is this to ask, just clarification for which will be included in the BDR?
Yes.
Secretary? Secretary would have that
Secretary, please
information.
have that list. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
I don't have a comprehensive list. Give me one moment.
Thank you. I believe 3 of them passed from Youth Legislator Chen, myself, and Cohen, but if we could confirm that.
That's what I'm showing as well, but I also want to confirm for the record before we move on.
All right. I believe those are the 3.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. So those are recommendation numbers 4, 5, and 7.
That is
All right, the Nevada
correct.
Youth Legislature, thank you. The Nevada Youth Legislature has voted to incorporate enhancements 4, 5, and 7 into the MYL bill for the 2025 legislative session. Ms. McManus, would you please read these enhancements for the record?
Enhancement recommendation number 4 is to include counseling personnel in addition to administrators when notifying parents or guardians in section 1. Enhancement.
Add or trusted adult to that, please.
Parents, guardians, or trusted adults in section 1.
Counselor or trusted adult.
Oh, I gotcha. My apologies. So for the record, a recommendation enhancement number 4 is to include counselors or trusted guardians in addition to administrators when notifying parents or guardians in section 1. Recommendation 5 is to include the recommendation from the Deputy Superintendent McGill regarding evidence-based screening to identify drug use in addition to section 1. Recommendation 7 is to require reports to be generated by schools to track data annually to determine the efficacy of the bill.
Thank you, Ms. McManus, and thank you everyone for sharing your ideas regarding these enhancements. I look forward to discussing the proposed language and details of the MYL's 2025 BDR at our January 22nd, 2025 meeting. I believe now we have a preview of upcoming activities, meetings, and trainings. All right, perfect. The next order of business is agenda item 8, which is a preview of upcoming NYL activities, meetings, and trainings. Outreach recruitment letters or videos are due on or before December 14th, 2024. Our public testimony reports are due on or before February 8th, 2025. It is a good idea to send the assignments before the due date. The assignment templates for these activities are in our training binders, and Mrs. Ashdown will also send PDF fillable forms. A list of our district legislators is included in our folders, so we can send our completed outreach recruitment letters or videos to Senator Wiener, our current legislators, and Mrs. Ashdown. The NYL gatherings are from 2:30 to 4 p.m. on Wednesday, January 8th, 2025 in Carson City, and Thursday, January 9th, 2025 in Las Vegas. You will find an invitation to these events in your meeting folders. Our next meeting is scheduled for January 22nd, 2025. I look forward to seeing all of you then. Agenda item 9 is time for youth legislators' comments, questions, and/or discussion. I'll ask Senator Wiener to lead this portion of the meeting.
We have about 7 minutes now. A brief input from anybody, any things that are still processing that you'd like to share with your colleagues as we do at the end of our meetings and trainings. Is there anything that you want to share? Anything that's come up or question? Anything that's still lingering that you'd like to share? Yes, Cheerios.
Yeah, just to confirm, so we'll still get to revisit this in January, right? And then obviously amend in or amend out,
did
right?
share with us, gave us a legal clarification. We'll be drafting based on what occurred today. And then you will see an actual draft of the bill, and you will have one more opportunity to look at, because you're going to see the language as is created in the BDR as legal language. So you'll have an opportunity to review the bill draft at your January meeting and fine tune anything. You still be able to ask questions. This was one step closer to that.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? All right. Thank you, Senator Weiner. I will now open the second period of public comment. The same rules mentioned during the first period of public comment apply. Please try to avoid repeating testimony if someone has already made your point. Each person will be asked to limit their testimony to 2 minutes. Is there anyone wishing to testify in Carson City? All right, seeing none, is there anyone wishing to testify in Las Vegas? All right, seeing none. BPS, is there anyone on the line to make public comment?
Chair, your public line is open and working, but there are still no callers.
Thank you. It appears we do not have anyone who is prepared to provide public comment at this time. Therefore, we will move on to the next portion of this meeting. We're now ready to adjourn. Do any youth legislators have any final thoughts or comments before adjourning? Youth Legislator Chen, go ahead.
Youth Legislator Chen, I just wanted to add the recommendations were definitely, it was engaging and it was a great addition, and I really think it did enhance the bill. And yeah.
Thank you, Youth Legislator Chen. All right, any other comments or questions at this time?
I would like to just thank everyone for the highest level of engagement of youth legislators. As I sit here and after my few years in the legislature, experiencing it from your seats, as well as now an observer, the level of commitment that you have made to the program, to the process, to this particular 3-month consideration of your BDR, and you still have one in January to finalize it. The level of intelligence, the engagement of your heads and your hearts, that your attention, your consideration, your compassion, as well as the passions of those who presented the measures since September, has been exemplary, continues to just keep us awed. And I want you to know that you are elevating us to the highest level that the program has been since it was created in 2007. And I'm grateful to be part of it and grateful to be here to experience what we have just witnessed again from the level of engagement that you all contribute to the program and how you raise the bar each time you come together as individuals representing the youth of Nevada. And I'm humbled, again, grateful, and looking forward to our next opportunity to share conversation around the bill that will go to the 2025 session from the Nevada Youth Legislature. Thank you.
Thank you, Youth Legislator McCarthy.
I just want to say, after working on this bill up to this point, except, today at this meeting, myself, I'm so glad to hear all your input, to hear other perspectives and all the valuable information you all can bring to the table. And what we've already done to improve our bill has made me very proud of it. And I'm excited to see where we all can take this.
Thank you so much for the commentary. All right, Youth Legislator Cohen.
I just want to add that I think when we all started in our terms, we all knew that we'd be able to make some sort of difference on behalf of the youth. And now, we're just one step closer to finally doing so. So I just want to say I'm excited to see where it takes us. And I'm glad that we're getting closer to making a real difference in Nevada.
All right, thank you. Any other commentary at this time?
I just want to say that this entire experience has been incredible. It's been incredibly enlightening, and I honestly look forward to seeing how we can make this bill into law and make it benefit everyone in Nevada. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Anyone else at this time? I just would like to share and echo the thoughts that we've all had. And thank you to Senator Weiner and Ms. Ashdown for helping us through that process. I know it was the first time we did the recommendation process. And so it was a bit of a lot to get through and guide us through that process. So we appreciate it. And we want to thank you guys for your steadfast commitment always to the youth legislature and the work that we're doing here. We want to thank you guys. All right, so I believe we are now ready to adjourn. And so this concludes our business for today. Thank you everyone for your utmost participation, active listening, and discussion skills today. I think we have exhibited awesome skills today in those regards. And once again, thank you to our witnesses for coming today and sharing your thoughts and perspectives and expertise with us. We greatly appreciate it. And so with that being said, I believe we are good to adjourn. This concludes our business for today, and this meeting of the Nevada Youth Legislature is now adjourned.